Chapter 63. That night, under the leadership of Shurao Tianrun, the village head, all the villagers gathered in the ancestral hall and began to distribute the daily necessities. This time, Lin Sun brought back a large number of items, including cloth, clothes, oil, salt, vinegar, and other daily necessities, as well as some seeds of spiritual grains, spiritual vegetables, and spiritual herbs, as well as tools such as hoes and sickles for farming in spiritual fields. When all the necessities were distributed, the villagers were extremely excited. In the past, when Lien Ruffeng was the guard commander, the daily necessities he brought back could barely meet the needs of food and clothing. But what Lin Sun brought back today was not only abundant, but also varied. Comparing the two, it was obvious which was better. Most importantly, each household got 3 imperial silver coins, which was equivalent to 300 imperial copper coins. For the villagers who had never walked out of the 3,000 mountains, this was already a considerable amount of wealth. All these made the villagers more grateful to Lin Sun, and Lin Sun's reputation in the village reached an unprecedented height. Until late at night, the villagers left one after another, leaving only Lin Sun and the village head, Shurao Tianrun, in the ancestral hall. What's the use of giving money to the villagers? They will stay in Feiyun all their lives. How can they have the chance to spend money? Shurao sighed, feeling that Lin Sun was too extravagant and didn't need to do so. It may not be useful now, but it may be useful in the future. Lin Sun smiled. What's more, the money is from selling Feiyun fire copper. Just take it as your salary for mining. Shurao Tianrun said grumpily. The salary is at most 30 imperial copper coins. How can it be worth 3 imperial silver coins? Lin Sun smiled without saying anything. Although he had promised Shurao Tianrun a long time ago that the villagers would only receive some salary when mining Feiyun fire copper, he would not take any profits. But how could Lin Sun really treat the villagers as servants working for him? In his eyes, Feiyun village was no different from his own home, and the villagers were his relatives. Naturally, they should have a share of the wealth he earned. On this point, Lin Sun would never be stingy with his financial resources. Alas, I really don't know what to say to you. Shurao Tianrun sighed helplessly. In fact, Lin's action moved him a lot. Seeing that it was too late to turn back, he had to give up. Uncle Xiao, I believe that Feiyun village will only get better in the future. We should have a long-term vision. For the sake of the future, we must make everyone rich first. In this way, maybe all of us can live in the city one day. Lin Sun said seriously, don't you want your children and grandchildren to get out of poverty so that they can live a better life like the children in the city? Shurao Tianrun was moved and fell in his silence. At this moment, he was indeed moved by the beautiful vision described by Lin Sun. Yes, the villagers had been poor all their lives. Did they want the next generation to continue living in poverty? Of course not. Without saying anything more, Lin Sun got up and left. He knew clearly that it would take more than one day to change the situation. When the villagers of Feiyun village became rich with the income from the Feiyun fire copper mine, they would naturally think about long-term things. The so-called survival and life were 2 completely different states. In the past, the villagers of Feiyun village solved the problem of survival, which was the most important thing. But when they solved the problem of survival, they would naturally consider the quality of life and the cultivation of the next generation of children. Now, the Feiyun fire copper mine provided Feiyun village with a solution to the problem of survival and pursuit of life. Lin Sun was very sure that even if he left, the lives of the villagers would only get better and better. Of course, the premise was that no accidents happened. But considering the credibility and responsibility of Keystone business, there was no need to worry about it. The next morning, Gao Guiyong and Zhou Quan left. They had finished their task and reached an agreement with Shurao Tianrun that they would come to purchase Feiyun fire copper in person every month and bring daily necessities for the villagers. It was a mutually beneficial deal. The only difference was that the place of transaction was in Feiyun village, which saved the villagers from many unnecessary risks. Also in the morning, Lin Sun gathered Luer and the other 3 children who had stepped into the first level of martial realm and gave them the chi drawing elixir, internal strengthening pill, body opening powder, and other elixirs purchased from Green Sun Tribe. There were originally more than 20 children in the village, but regrettably, only 4 of them were able to sense chi and draw it into their bodies. In other words, amongst these 20-plus children, only Ing Luer and the other 3 had stepped foot onto the path of cultivation, whereas the other children didn't have much hope. This was the reality. Only a few people in the world could become practitioners. From this day on, Lin Sun unloaded the responsibility of martial arts master in the village. He had taught all that he could, and the rest was up to the children to practice by themselves. As the saying goes, the master leads the way, but the cultivation depends on the individual. Whether it was eradicating Lien Ruffing and his followers or suppressing Wu business with the help of Keystone Business, they were all for the purpose of eliminating hidden dangers for Feiyun Village. Excavating Feiyun Fire Copper and training the children to practice martial arts was for the future development of Feiyun Village. Now, all these things had been carried out smoothly, and Lin Sun had completely extricated himself from all kinds of trivial affairs. But Lin Sun didn't relax at all. With the guarantee of many materials, Lin Sun didn't need to worry about food and cultivation anymore. He practiced martial arts and inscribing spiritual tattoos during the day, and refined his cultivation and soul at night. Every 3 days, he would enter the spiritual tattoo battlefield, mill waterfalls to break through. He made full use of every bit of time. Occasionally, he would spare some time to fight with Xia Ji in body refining, and the insights he gained were all used to perfect his self-created combat skill, separating tendons and dislocating bones. Xia Ji, on the other hand, lived a carefree life except eating and sleeping. Half a month later, with the constant refining of blood marrow grit and the power of wine of 4 seasons, Lin Sun successfully stepped into the 5th level of martial realm, marrow cleansing. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the courtyard, Lin Sun's figure moved like lightning, leaving a series of residual shadows in the air. The sky breacher in his hand was like a bolt of lightning, wantonly displaying all kinds of moves of 6-word saber play. A boulder was thrown over, but it was cut into neat stone strips in the air by layers of saber shadows like tidewater, as easy as cutting tofu. Each stone strip was as thick as a thumb and 3 inches long, exactly the same. Bang! After that, every single stone hadn't even fallen to the ground when they exploded into pieces in unison, and they transformed into fine powder that rustled through the air. Lin Sun's speed and strength could be seen from this blow alone. Besides, the edge of the saber was not only full of sharpness, but also contained a kind of internal strength, which finally turned the boulder into powder and dissipated. Sure enough, after entering the marrow cleansing realm, my control of power has become stronger. Lin Sun put away his saber and stood still, quietly feeling the nuances of this blow. The marrow cleansing realm was the 5th level of martial realm. Upon reaching this realm, the whole body's bone marrow would show a silvery luster, as if it had been tempered 1,000 times. This was the so-called refining the blood like pulp and the marrow like frost. At the same time, the advancement to the 5th level of martial realm made Lin Sun's spiritual energy more vigorous, which was twice as strong as before. His chi was surging. Just by standing there casually, Lin Sun looked fierce and aggressive. This was a sign that the chi inside and outside the body had been further improved. The next realm was blood burning, the 6th level of martial realm. As the name suggested, it was to refine the blood until it boiled like burning and ran in the body, making it full of vigor and vigor. At this stage, the skin, bones, blood, internal organs, chi, and other parts of the practitioner's body would enter a state of true gold fire refinement. Even if the practitioner's cultivation stagnated in the future, he could easily extend his lifespan to over 100 years old. However, for Lin Sun, who had just entered the 5th level of martial realm, there was still a long way to go before he reached the 6th level of martial realm, blood burning. His top priority was to refine his foundation well. After all, he had just entered a new realm, so he needed a period of consolidation to be familiar with the new power. Are you going to cultivate like this every day? Xia Ji asked beside him. She was the one who threw the boulder just now. Of course not. Lin Sun put away the sky breacher and sat at the stone table. He picked up a cup of iced tea and drank it up, feeling refreshed all over. In about a month, we'll leave here for Donglin town of Xiao Empire. I've thought about it for a long time. If you want to be stronger in the future, you must find a powerful teacher or enter a powerful school to study. Lin Sun said casually, when we enter Donglin town, I'll help you inquire about this information. Xia Ji shook her head. I don't want to be apprenticed. Lin Sun was a little surprised, and then said with a smile, then I'll find a school to study in. There were different academies set up in every city in the empire. They mainly provided guidance on cultivation, but there were also some academies that taught some cultivation skills, such as spirit runes, weaponsmithing, alchemy, music, spirit plants, beast taming, military affairs, and so on. There was a wide variety of courses. Will you go? Xia Ji raised her little face and stared at Lin Sun with her clear and dark eyes, looking serious. Me? Lin Sun thought for a while and shook his head. I'm not sure. If you don't go, I won't go either, said Xia Ji. Lin Sun felt helpless. Let's talk about it later. Anyway, you can't leave me alone. Xia Ji seemed to think of something, and her beautiful and quiet little face was full of firmness. After saying that, she turned around and walked into the room. Seeing Xia Ji's disappearing figure, Lin Sun, who was sitting alone in the courtyard, fell into silence. Chapter 64. Time flew. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, Gao Guiyong and Zhou Quan arrived as scheduled and were warmly received by the villagers of Feiyun village. They purchased more than 400 tons of Feiyun fire copper at the price of 700 imperial silver coins. At the same time, Gao Guiyong also brought Lin a letter written by Shu Liang. The content of the letter was very simple. It just told Lin that there was only 1 month left before the county test in Donglin town. If he wanted to participate in it, he should set off for Donglin town as soon as possible. Lin knew that the county test was usually held in December each year, the state test in March of the next year, and the province test in June, 3 months after the state test. As for the nation test, it would be held in September. It was said that in the forbidden city of Xiao Empire, the capital of Xiao Empire, Xiao flowers would bloom as scheduled in September every year, decorating every place in the city like a sea of flowers. It was a first-class spectacle in the world and was known as the Xiao Flower Festival. Those who could successfully pass the nation test were often praised as the best of Xiao, the best of the country. Then they would be arranged to go to the most famous imperial street in the Forbidden City to walk in the sea of Xiao flowers and accept the cheers and praises of the public. This tradition was also called the Journey of the Heavenly Suns. Lin Sun read the letter in his hand for a long time. When dusk fell, he finally made a decision. 3 days later, before dawn, Lin Sun had packed up his luggage. Holding Xia Ji's little hand, he pushed open the door and walked out of the courtyard. Are you sure you won't tell the others? Xia Ji rarely asked. No, it's not life and death. It's better not to disturb them. Lin Sun shook his head. In fact, he couldn't bear to see the villagers see them off. However, when they arrived at the entrance of the village, they were stunned. It was still dark, and the mountains in the distance were shrouded in darkness. But the entrance of the village was brightly lit by the raging fire. Shurao Tenrin and other villagers, old people and children, were all standing there quietly with torches in their hands. Every face was full of reluctance. Many of them even had tears in their eyes, but they tried hard not to cry out. No one spoke. The atmosphere was silent, and only the sound of the wind could be heard. Lin Sun was completely stunned, unable to calm down for a long time. Let's go. Shurao Tonrin took a deep breath and said in a low voice, Don't say anything. We just want to send you off. Lin Sun nodded and mounted the scaly horse with Xia Ji in his arms. The horse's hooves knocked on the ground, making a crisp sound, which was particularly loud in this quiet atmosphere. Many children couldn't help but want to rush forward, but they were firmly stopped by the adults by their side. There were also some women who couldn't help but lower their heads and shed tears, feeling indescribably sad in their hearts. Under the lamplight, Lin Sun looked at each face silently. It suddenly occurred to him that he had been living in Feiyun village for half a year. Half a year. Not only had Feiyun village changed a lot, but also he himself had changed a lot. Now that he was leaving, when could he return to his hometown and see his old friends again? Lin! Suddenly, a shout rang in Lin's ears, waking him up from his messy thoughts. He turned around and saw Shirao Tunren, the village head, saying in a low voice, "Remember, Feiyun village will always be your home. If you're too tired outside, don't force yourself. Feiyun village will always wait for you to come back. Waiting for you." The villagers couldn't hold back their emotions anymore and shouted in unison. Their voices, full of expectation, echoed in the night. Lin Sun took a few deep breaths, laughed, and waved his hand. Then he drove the scaly horse to gallop away. At that time, the first ray of light tore through the darkness at the break of dawn, sprinkling the first ray of light between heaven and earth, illuminating the mountains and rivers, and bathing the young man on the horse in a dazzling light. The frozen scene at that moment was destined to be unforgettable for all the villagers in Feiyun village. Even when Lin Sun's figure disappeared in the boundless sky, the villagers still didn't disperse. They couldn't help recalling many past events in their minds. When Lin Sun came to Feiyun village for the first time, who could imagine that it was this young man who helped them resolve one crisis after another? Who could imagine that Feiyun village had undergone earth-shaking changes in just half a year because of his arrival? The villagers were not stupid. Of course, they knew that Lin Sun really regarded Feiyun village as his home, and they also regarded Lin Sun as one of their own. The only pity was that they all knew that people like Lin Sun were not destined to stay in Feiyun village for a lifetime. The outside world was his stage. Lin Sun, will we come back in the future? Yes. Those people are very nice. Of course, from now on, it may be difficult for us to meet people who are as nice to us as they are. Yes, Xie, the outside world is very big, and there are many unimaginable dangers. I will do my best to protect you. As long as you don't leave me, I won't feel wronged. Haha, how could I leave you? In the boundless mountains, Lin Sun galloped wildly on the horse. The cold morning wind blew on his face, making his handsome and angular face look extraordinarily firm. Xie sat in Lin Sun's arms with a faint smile on her beautiful and tranquil face. Her world was so small that it could only contain Lin Sun alone. 3 days later, Lin Sun came to Green Sun Tribe and met Shuel Yang. He left Green Sun Tribe in the afternoon with a map to Donglin Town given by Shuel Yang and headed north. At the same time, Yin Zhen, the shopkeeper of Keystone Business in Green Sun Tribe, sent a letter to Donglin Town thousands of miles away. The letter was addressed to Mu Wansu, the person in charge of Keystone Business in Donglin Town. The content was very simple. It only said, Lin Sun has gone to Donglin Town and is expected to arrive in 2 days. The letter was carried by a green feather falcon and fell into Mu Wansu's hands in only 6 hours. At that time, Mu Wansu was taking a bath. Seeing the letter, she tore it up and said leisurely, "Come on. Anyway, I have the final say in Keystone Business in Donglin Town. As long as you little bastard are in Donglin Town, don't expect to have anything to do with Keystone Business." As she said, she got up from the bathtub. Her graceful and proud white body was covered with water droplets, as if it was shining with an attractive luster. Mu Wansu put on a loose bathrobe and stood in front of a huge bronze mirror, wiping her wet hair with a clean towel. There was a kind of indescribable beauty in her languid manner. Immediately, she seemed to think of something. A pair of black eyebrows raised sharply like a blade. No, Keystone Business can't even buy and sell goods with this little bastard in the future. We must cut off any contact with him. Didn't the eldest child say that this little bastard will become a great person in the future? I'd like to see whether he can keep a foothold in Donglin Town without the help of Keystone Business. Thinking of this, Mu Wansu's red and full lips curled up into a smile, and her beautiful eyes became blurred. She murmured, Lin Sun, don't blame me for being ruthless. It's you who made me angry before. You must remember in the future that if a woman misses you, the consequences will be terrible. At the same time, in Wu business of Green Sun tribe. Shopkeeper, we sent someone to Feiyun village to investigate. Deacon Wu Henshui and his subordinates, including Lien Rufeng, have all disappeared. I'm afraid the result is just as you expected. They've all met with an accident. In addition, just this evening, the spies sent back the news that Lin Sun has set off for Donglin town, accompanied by only a little girl. A subordinate came to report. Wu Daong listened quietly, and his face changed for a long time. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said, of all the places to go, he chose to go to Donglin town. Isn't he throwing himself into a trap? That's the base camp of Wu family. Although Keystone Business also has industries in Donglin town, as long as we seize the opportunity, we may be able to take advantage of the situation to get rid of this boy. For a whole month, whenever Wu Daong thought of Wu Henshui who disappeared and Mad Dog Wu Jie and others who were killed, he felt like needles in his heart. Especially since the matter was stopped by Keystone Business that day, the reputation of Wu business in the Green Sun tribe had plummeted to the bottom, becoming a laughingstock. This made Wu Daong more resentful. Now, hearing that Lin Sun was going to Donglin town to make a living, Wu Daong immediately smelled the smell of opportunity. As he said, Donglin town was the base camp of clan of Wu, and its power was intertwined. Although Keystone Business was a first-class behemoth in the empire, it could only be regarded as an outsider in Donglin town after all. As the saying goes, a powerful dragon cannot suppress a snake in its own territory. Wu Daong was very clear that there were thousands of ways to kill people. It was not necessary to deal with Lin Sun openly. As long as he arranged some means and was careful, it was enough to eradicate Lin Sun silently. At that time, even if this matter was known by Keystone Business, Clan of Wu would never admit that it was done by themselves, and the consequences would naturally not be so serious. Having figured this out, Wu Daong could no longer hold back. That night, he hurriedly left Green Sun Tribe with several guards and rushed to Donglin Town. Shopkeeper, bad news. Wu Daong has taken people to Donglin Town night. I'm afraid that he has heard the news about Lin Sun and intends to harm him. In Keystone Business, Shu Liang hurriedly found Yin Zhen and said worriedly, "Don't worry, I've sent a message to Miss Wansu." Yin Zhen said indifferently, "With Miss Wansu's help, no matter how rampant Clan of Wu is, how dare they offend Keystone Business because of Lin Sun?" Hearing this, Shu Liang was relieved. But neither Yin Zhen nor Shu Liang knew that Mu Wansu had made a plan to draw a clear line with Lin Sun. Similarly, Lin Sun probably didn't know that so many things had happened secretly because of his trip to Donglin Town. Chapter 65. Li Ji's Bookstore in Dongxin City. This was an unremarkable small bookstore, located in the deep corner of a bustling street. It was quite remote, so business was naturally poor. The owner, surnamed Li, was an old man in his twilight years. At this time, he was drowsily supporting his forehead with his hand behind the counter. In the bookstore, there was only a teenager selecting books in front of the bookshelf. The atmosphere was quiet. The teenager was about 13 or 14 years old, but he was thin and slender, with a delicate and warm face. He was dressed in coarse gray clothes, but looked fresh and clean. It was Lin Sun. Before long, Lin Sun selected 4 more books and came to the counter. He said softly, "Uncle." The old man suddenly woke up and said with a smile, "Well, let me have a look. Imperial Mountains and Rivers, Imperial History, Basic Handbook of Cultivation, Spiritual Tattoo Collection." The old man raised his head and said in surprise, "Nowadays, young people are rarely interested in these kinds of knowledge. It's rare to see someone who likes reading as much as you do." Lin Sun smiled slightly. "Uncle, how much are these 4 books?" The old man said casually, 20 copper coins if you want." After paying, Lin Sun picked up the books and hurried out of the bookstore. The night outside was as dark as ink, but the rows of buildings in the distance were brightly lit, as beautiful as stars falling to the earth. Lin Sun hurried along the street in the night breeze. Before long, he turned into a shop called Tiger Fruit Juice. He took out 5 copper coins and bought a large cup of sweet and sour cloud fruit juice. This was the signature drink of Tiger Berry Shop. It was blended with several spiritual materials, such as poria leaf, purple floating vine, cloud fragrant fruit, and some spiritual vegetables. Not only did it taste sweet, the key was that it didn't have many impurities. It was extremely suitable for cultivators to drink. Holding the books and fruit juice, Lin Sun shuttled through the crisscrossing streets without a moment's rest. Before long, he came to an extremely prosperous and spacious street. The streets were filled with people and endless streams of horses and carriages. Multicolored lights adorned the buildings on both sides of the street. It was gorgeous and bright. Many passers-by wore gorgeous clothes. Treasure carriages shuttled back and forth. From time to time, practitioners riding scaly horses, antlers, and other mounts galloped past. Some peddlers set up their stalls and frequently called out. The bustling noise continued to ferment in the air above this bustling street. This was the most famous street in Donglin Town. It was 8,000 feet long, so it was also called 800 Street. In the center of this street, there were all kinds of top businesses, restaurants, inns, elixir stores, and spiritual material stores in Donglin Town. Everything that one could ever want to be found here. Each shop was a well-known money-squandering den in Donglin Town, backed by various influential cities. Therefore, almost all the customers were practitioners with high social status, which ordinary people could not afford. At the east end of 800 Street, there was a school named Donglin School, which was sponsored by the imperial government. Every year, it would recruit students and impart knowledge to them. It was very famous. As long as one passed the examination, he could practice in it after paying the tuition fee. Among all the cultivators in Donglin Town who were interested in cultivation, it was a great honor to be able to study in Donglin School. Lin Sun happened to pass by Donglin School on his way. He couldn't help but take a few more glances at it. The school occupied a large area, with buildings scattered all over the place. From time to time, students came and went in the buildings. After standing there and watching silently for a moment, Lin Sun turned around and left. At this time, a group of young boys and girls came from the opposite side. They were all dressed in gorgeous marten coats and were in high spirits, which made them stand out from the crowd. 1 month later, I could take part in county test. I have already reached the 3rd level of martial realm, which is enough to pass the test easily. Ha ha ha! Among us, which one of us is under 15 years old, and which one of us has not reached the 3rd level of martial realm? County test is a piece of cake for us. Right, county test is not worth worrying about at all. What we should really consider is whether we should directly go to Green Maple County to take part in state test in March next year after passing county test. You can't say that. This time, there are as many as 3,000 students in our Donglin School who will take part in county test, and only 1,000 are admitted. In this way, 2,000 people will be directly eliminated. Don't be careless. Alas, I'm also worried about this. As these young men and women walked, they chattered incessantly, and the topics of their discussion were all focused on the capital test. Lin Sun was about to pay more attention to them. Unfortunately, those young boys and girls had all walked into Donglin School. Obviously, they were all students of Donglin School. Seeing this, Lin Sun didn't want to catch up with them. I didn't expect so many people to take part in county test, and 2,000 people will be eliminated. That is to say, even if I meet the conditions of passing the test, I may not be admitted. Lin Sun thought as he walked. The so-called admission was to get the certificate of passing county test, and this certificate was one of the conditions for taking part in state test. Not long after, Lin Sun's figure disappeared from the 800 Avenue. After walking for half an hour, he entered a deserted, dark, and dilapidated street. This was the civilian area of Donglin Town, and most of the people living there were at the bottom of society. Compared with the prosperity of other places, this civilian area was undoubtedly extremely dilapidated, and the people living there were all kinds of people mixed together. The public security here was also very poor. Every day, thieves, hooligans, and murderers came and went. It was extremely chaotic. Lin Sun wouldn't have arranged his residence here if he had a choice. Lin Sun walked along a dark alley with dirty water stains under his feet, and the barking of wild dogs and cats came from afar from time to time. At the corner of the alley, a man with a protruding mouth and monkey cheeks suddenly rushed out and greeted Lin Sun with a smile. "Hi, buddy. Are you alone?" Crack. As soon as the man raised his hand, Lin Sun grasped it and broke the man's wrist with his palm and fingers. The man's raised palm loosened, and a small blade with cold light fell to the ground, making a clanking sound. The man felt pain and was about to scream, but he was knocked out by Lin Sun with a slap. His body went limp and fell beside the dirty road. From the beginning to the end, all the actions happened in a flash, neat and tidy, and came to an end in an instant. Lin Sun seemed to be used to this kind of thing. With a natural and calm look, he walked forward. Not long after Lin Sun left, two sneaky figures appeared at the corner of the alley again. When they saw the man who fainted on the ground, one of the fat men couldn't help but gloat. "How many has it been?" The other man counted with his fingers. "The young master moved in 7 days ago. This is the 19th person who has been killed by him." "Ha, Rotten Head Zhang used to be a clever man, but he is so stupid today that he wants to kill this young master. Doesn't he know how Snake Boss died? He has eyes but fails to see. Now, in this area, who doesn't know that there is a ruthless young master who kills people without blinking in Courtyard 49 deep in the alley? Well, it's time for us to take action." As they said, the two men leaned over and groped the man called Rotten Head Zhang. After getting more than 10 copper coins, they left happily. In Courtyard 49 deep in the alley, Lin Sun pushed the door open and entered. Boom! A gust of wind from a fist tore through the air, and it was filled with a terrifying aura. It smashed into the air, causing the air to explode and scatter, emitting a dull explosion. Lin Sun didn't move and said helplessly, "It's me." Suddenly, the fist wind disappeared, and everything returned to calm. The young and delicate figure of Xia Ji appeared in front of him. "I know it's you. If it were someone else, he would have died." Xia Ji stepped forward, took a cup of cloudy fruit juice from Lin Sun naturally, and turned away. Lin Sun shrugged his shoulders with a smile and followed her in. The courtyard was not large. In the center of the courtyard, there was a big locust tree with an umbrella-like crown and shade. On the other side, there were 2 houses and a kitchen. After thorough cleaning, it was quite quiet and tidy. In the room, a Southern Spirit incense candle was lit. The candlelight was bright and emitted a trace of calming fragrance. Lin Sun sat at the desk, reading the books he had bought. Xia Ji sat quietly on a stool on one side, sipping the cloudy fruit juice in the cup. 7 days ago, they came to Donglin town. However, when they were looking for a place to live, they found that it was impossible for Lin Sun to rent a good place in the town with only 300 silver coins. Living in it was not only expensive, but also unsuitable for long-term living with too many people. Lin Sun had no choice but to rent this courtyard in the civilian area. The rent was surprisingly cheap, only 30 silver coins a year. But after 7 days of living, Lin Sun finally understood why the rent was so cheap. It was because this place was too chaotic, with crooks mixed in with honest people and all kinds of scums. On the first day, a man nicknamed Snakehead led a group of local ruffians to collect protection fees. On the second day, Lin Sun went out to buy daily necessities. When he returned home, he saw 3 dead bodies lying in the courtyard. After asking Xia Ji, he found that they were 3 thieves. On the third day, Lin Sun was stopped in the street by a group of people who had been lying in ambush and wanted to rob him. On the fourth day, Lin Sun met a group of villains who tried to rob a woman. He immediately went to her rescue, but it turned out that the woman was in cahoots with those villains. On the 5th day, in a word, in the 7 days since Lin Sun moved here, all kinds of thieves, hooligans, scoundrels, and villains came and went like wild dogs smelling blood. Of course, those people had a miserable end, and many of them had even disappeared from the world. But Lin Sun was very clear that if he dealt with these thieves every day, it was hard to guarantee that nothing would go wrong. Most importantly, he had Xia Ji by his side. He didn't want the little girl to grow up in such a dirty and dangerous environment. As for the reason, it was very simple. Lin Sun grew up in the dark environment of the mine prison. Since he was a child, he had seen many cruel, cunning, bloody, and vicious tricks, as well as many villains whose hands were stained with blood. Compared to these villains, the local ruffians who occupied this civilian area were as pure as white lotuses. They were as obedient as inexperienced chicks, and they were not intimidating at all. Lin Sun knew that if there had been no Master Lu, he would have been infected by this environment since he was a child, and would have sunk into the dark road and become inhumane. In view of this, Lin Sun naturally wouldn't let Xia Ji live in such a dirty and dark environment. But if he wanted to move, he would need a huge sum of money, which Lin Sun couldn't do for the time being. So now, what Lin Sun was most concerned about was not how to pass the county test, but how to make money. Chapter 66. Without money, one couldn't do anything. After entering Donglin town, Lin Sun deeply understood the meaning of this sentence. Clothing, food, shelter, and transportation all needed money, and as a practitioner, his expenses were far beyond the imagination of ordinary people. For example, ordinary people only needed food, but practitioners were different. In order to keep their bodies pure, they had to eat spiritual grains, spiritual vegetables, and ferocious beasts' flesh and blood as ingredients. And the price of spiritual grains and spiritual vegetables was frighteningly high. There are even some practitioners with strong family backgrounds who would consume panaceas and panaceas to replenish their body's needs in order to hone and refine their cultivation at all times. The value of these treasures was not something that an ordinary practitioner could afford. In addition, the clothes worn by practitioners, the mounts they rode, the battle equipment they used, and the cultivation methods they needed all required a lot of money. Why was there a saying in the world that the poor study and the rich practice? That was to say, only the children of rich families with strong family background could not worry about money and concentrate on practicing martial arts. As for the poor, even if they had the aptitude for cultivation, they couldn't make bricks without straw. Because of the lack of all kinds of cultivation resources, they were doomed to not go far on the road of cultivation in the future. Why did the county test held by the Empire every year attract so many practitioners to participate in it? Even many practitioners from poor families regarded the county test as an opportunity for them to leap over the Dragon Gate. Because as long as they passed the county test, these practitioners from poor families could win the favor of many chambers of commerce, clans, and aristocratic families who would take them under their command and provide them with the support of cultivation resources. Everything was for the sake of cultivation, but it was impossible to cultivate without the support of money. During the 7 days in Donglin town, Lin Sun often went out for nothing else but to familiarize himself with and integrate into the imperial city as soon as possible. It was also the experience of these 7 days that made Lin Sun realize the importance of money deliberately. Donglin town was different from Green Sun tribe. Green Sun tribe couldn't compare with Donglin town in terms of prosperity. There were unimaginable cultivation resources in the city, but it was extremely difficult to obtain them. Especially for Lin Sun, this was the first time in his life that he stepped into a city. It was even more difficult for him to settle down in this densely populated place with strong practitioners and complicated forces. Make money. This was the most urgent matter. This was Lin's current idea. Only by making enough money could he and Xia Ji move to a new living environment, obtain more cultivation resources, and live a better life in Xiao Empire. At the desk, Lin Sun suddenly sighed softly. Summer Solstice looked up and asked, "What's wrong?" Lin Sun closed the book in his hand and shook his head. Nothing. The name of the book was Imperial Mountains and Rivers, which he had just bought from Li Ji's bookstore tonight. It was a book about the mountains, rivers, geography, and latitude of Xiao Empire. Lin had intended to find out where the mine prison where he had lived was located, but he could only find the location of 3,000 mountains. Further south was the wasteland of turbulence, where the Empire of the Dark, the mortal enemy of Xiao Empire, was entrenched. Lin Sun still remembered that he was pushed into a deep mine tunnel by Master Lu and then lost consciousness. When he woke up again, he was already in the 3,000 mountains. This made him suspect that the mine prison where he had lived was probably located somewhere in the 3,000 mountains. It was a pity that the 3,000 mountains were so vast and boundless that even imperial mountains and rivers didn't have a specific description of it. But this book was not bad. Lin Sun finally understood that the land under his feet was called the Tsangta mainland, which was vast and boundless. And Xiao Empire was just one of the known countries on the Tsangta mainland. Are you still thinking about moving? Xia Ji suddenly frowned and asked. Yes. Lin Sun answered casually and opened another book named Handbook of Cultivation Basics. As the name suggested, it talked about the knowledge of cultivation. Although the content was simple, it was well organized. The book was divided into 5 parts according to the 5 realms of Martial Realm. Martial Realm, Gang Spirit, Sea of Spirit, Tao Insight, and Wheel Developing. For example, the 9 levels of Martial Realm, from the first level of Qi guiding to the last level of spiritual transformation, were all described. However, these were all theoretical knowledge instead of real cultivation experience. It could only let the readers know what the realm was like, what changes one could have after reaching this realm, and what the specific signs of advancement were. Although the content was very simple, Lin Sun read it with great interest. He knew how to cultivate, but what he lacked was the mastery of cultivation theory. No need to move. I like it here. Xia Ji also picked up a book named Imperial History and flipped through it. Lin Sun raised his head and looked at Xia Ji in surprise. You like it here? Xia Ji said without raising her head. It's rare that you can fight at any time here. If you move out, you will have no opponent to fight with. It's too boring. Speaking of this, she also raised her head and looked at Lin Sun seriously. Do you know what I felt the most during those days in Feiyun village? Lin Sun smiled bitterly and roughly guessed what Xia Ji was going to say. As expected, Xia Ji said the next moment, it's boredom. I have analyzed my strength and confirmed a fact. If I don't fight, my strength will gradually weaken. Lin Sun was slightly surprised and said with his eyes fixed, that is to say, only by fighting constantly can your strength not weaken? Xia Ji nodded. More than that. Only by fighting can I become stronger. I don't need cultivation or cultivation methods. What I need is just fighting. Lin Sun was stunned and suddenly realized the problem. He had always subconsciously regarded Xia Ji as a 5 or 6-year-old girl and had always tried his best to protect her. Although he had long known that Xia Ji was different from other children, he had never seriously thought about what Xia Ji really needed. At such a young age, she could easily kill Wu Henshui, who was on the 8th level of Martial Realm, and could live in the deep mountains and forests where fierce beasts lurked everywhere. Even his fighting capacity was far inferior to hers. So what on earth did she need? Lin Sun didn't think about it before. He only knew that Xia Ji liked to eat, sleep, and live a simple and carefree life. But after listening to Xia Ji's words, Lin Sun completely understood that Xia Ji had her own way of cultivation, her own ideas, and a life she wanted. Lin Sun pondered for a long time and said, I see. Then he scratched his head and said, but fighting means killing. Do you know what it means? Xia Ji nodded. I only kill enemies. Lin Sun smiled bitterly. But we don't have many enemies. Xia Ji asked in reply, really? Lin Sun thought for a while and fell silent. Did he really have no enemies? Of course. The enemy who dug out his spiritual vein, the one who destroyed the mind prison, and the one who made Master Lu's life and death uncertain could all be counted as enemies. But for the current Lin Sun, it seemed that it was too far away to solve these hatred. Your enemy seems to be the barbarian warrior. Lin Sun suddenly remembered that when he saw Xia Ji for the first time, she was being chased by a barbarian warrior of Sea Spirit Realm. I remember him. While I become stronger, I will kill him myself. Summer Solstice's expression was tranquil, and her voice was also very calm, as if for her, this matter was already destined to be done. Fight, fight. Lin Sun hesitated for a while. What Xia Ji needed was to fight, but he couldn't help her at all. Don't worry. I like fighting, but it doesn't mean I can't survive without fighting, Xia Ji said seriously. Lin Sun breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, that's good. Xia Ji paid no more attention to him. Instead, she raised the book in her hand, pointed at a paragraph on the last page, and said, "I fight to become stronger, but this man was born to fight. This is the difference between me and him." Lin Sun was curious and took it over. It read, "I was born with the luck of heaven and earth, and live for fighting. The glory of this life should be poured with the blood of enemies. If I die, I should take the battlefield as my grave and the bones of my enemies as my coffin. My head rests on the mountain of corpses, and my body lies in the sea of blood. I will sleep with the sky and the earth. In this way, I will have no regrets." Ning Bugue, the Blood King of Ziyao Empire. Just these words made Lin Sun's blood boil and a fighting spirit rise in his chest. He couldn't help but praise. The spirit of the Iron Blood King is so great that it can compete with the sun and the moon and compete with the ages. Speaking of this, he looked at Xia Ji, who was sitting quietly on one side, and said thoughtfully, "You are really different." A faint smile appeared at the corner of Xia Ji's mouth. At that moment, her beauty seemed to make the room more dazzling. Fortunately, the smile disappeared in a flash. Even so, Lin Sun couldn't help reminding her, "Xia Ji, don't show your face in public in the future." She was only 5 or 6 years old, but her beauty was too much. If she was seen by others, it would cause many unexpected disasters. Xia Ji raised her little face and answered seriously. Lin Sun smiled and said no more. He turned around and sat at the desk, taking out an inscribing pen, a swallowing knife, and a plate of finished spiritual ink. The inscribing pen was made of the leg bone of the iron-beaked pheasant. It was slender and straight, with a light purple body. Its blade was as thin as a cicada's wing. It was named Purple Pheasant by Lin Sun with a dazzling cold light. The swallowing knife was bought by Lin Sun from a weapon shop in the city tonight. It was made of the spiritual material rosy cloud steel. Because there was no spiritual tattoo, it could only be regarded as an ordinary weapon. The plate of spiritual ink was Red Fire Spiritual Ink, one of the most widely circulated spiritual inks in the market. It could be used to inscribe more than 10 kinds of basic spiritual tattoos of fire property. What Lin Sun needed to do now was to inscribe an explosive flame spiritual tattoo on the swallow-wing knife to transform it from an ordinary weapon to a spiritual weapon. This was one of the most effective ways Lin Sun could think of to make money at present. Chapter 67. Chi. Holding the brush in his palm, Lin Sun sent a wisp of spiritual energy along the slim and straight lavender body to the sharp tip of the brush. Suddenly, a wisp of light, as fine as a cow's hair, was condensed at the tip of the brush. With a nimble movement of his wrist, the tip of the brush plunged into a plate of bright red spiritual ink. In an instant, all the spiritual ink was absorbed. The wisp of light at the tip of the purple pheasant inscribing brush was burning like a flame, revealing a bloody red light. These two steps were called drawing spirit into the brush and drawing ink as the source. The test was the compatibility between the spiritual energy and the inscribing brush. The better the quality of the inscribing brush, the more sensitive it would be to guide the spiritual energy, and the fuller the spiritual ink would be. At this moment, Lin Sun sat in front of the desk with a solemn look on his face. His back was as straight as a spear, and he gazed at the swallow-wing saber on the desk with his deep black eyes. Without hesitation, he lifted the brush and dropped the ink. The tip of the brush, like a sharp blade, suddenly moved on the bright and clean surface of the swallow-wing saber, making a sweet and subtle rustling sound. Strands of crimson veins that were as fine as hair flowed out from the tip of the brush, like ink blooming in a clear river. It was light and graceful, with a kind of mysterious beauty. Lin Sun's wrist was like a nimble snake, controlling the tip of the brush in his palm to draw with precise, clean, and smooth movements. Although this was the first time in his life that Lin Sun really inscribed spiritual tattoos, he didn't feel nervous at all, because he had practiced this for countless times in the past years. He had already memorized the details of each spiritual tattoo and the key to each stroke of the brush. These were all learned from Master Lu since he was a child. At that time, he dealt with all kinds of basic spiritual tattoos every day. The secrets hidden deep under the complicated patterns had been discovered and mastered by Lin Sun a long time ago. The explosive flame spiritual tattoo, inscribed in front of him, was one of the basic spiritual tattoos. When he killed Lien Ruffin and others at the entrance of Feiyun village, the arrows were inscribed with explosive flame spiritual tattoo. But this time, the explosive flame spiritual tattoo was different because this time he was going to refine a real spiritual weapon. What was a spiritual weapon? It was a treasure that could completely match the Ling power of the Xiuzha and unleash great power. The only difference between spiritual weapons and ordinary weapons was that spiritual weapons had spiritual tattoo patterns, which gave them incredible power. The explosive flame spirit pattern that was engraved on the arrow last time was only a semi-finished product. The quality of the spirit ink used could only be considered normal. This kind of arrow would be completely useless after one use, so it could only be considered a semi-spirit weapon. This time, Lin specially bought a swallow-wing saber and a plate of high-quality red fire spiritual ink. The explosive flame spiritual tattoo to be inscribed must be complete, rigorous, and completely integrated with the material of the swallow-wing saber. Only in this way could it be called a true totem, and only in this way could it be used by cultivators to display great power. Although Lin Sun had already memorized all the mysteries of the explosive flame spiritual tattoo and practiced it countless times in order to inscribe this spiritual tattoo, he still dared not be careless at this moment. The reason was very simple. The process of refining a spiritual weapon seemed simple. All it needed was a carrier, namely a weapon, and then inscribe the spiritual tattoo pattern on it. But when it came to refining, there were extremely harsh requirements. It was universally acknowledged that to refine a spiritual weapon, a spiritual tattooist must have the cultivation of Gang Spirit Realm in order to support the inscribing of a complete spiritual tattoo pattern. Otherwise, the inscribing of the spiritual tattoo would be stopped halfway due to the lack of spiritual energy. Naturally, it was impossible to refine a real spiritual weapon. Lin Sun now only had the cultivation of marrow cleansing, the 5th level of martial realm, which was far from the Gang Spirit Realm. Fortunately, inscribing spiritual tattoo was not a test of cultivation, but the amount of spiritual energy in the body, which made Lin Sun, who had a strong foundation of spiritual energy, make up for this shortcoming. Speaking of which, the spiritual energy in Lin Sun's body was indeed huge, strong and pure without any impurities, all thanks to the 4 spiritual vortexes on the heart vessel and 4 acupoints. After being refined by the spiritual vortexes for 4 times, it could be said that Lin Sun's cultivation was no different from that of other practitioners on the 5th level of martial realm. But the purity and strength of the spiritual energy in his body was far beyond that of others. This was also the reason why Lin Sun dared to refine a spiritual weapon, even though he was only on the 5th level of martial realm. Chi-Chi, swallowing and spitting flames, the tip of the brush kept inscribing, leaving fine and dense red lines on the surface of the swallow-wing saber. As time went by, Lin Sun's soul perception and spiritual energy were perfectly integrated on the purple pheasant inscribing brush in his palm. While the spiritual energy in his body was constantly being consumed as time went by, it was far from the point where he could not make ends meet. Lin Sun, who was concentrating on inscribing spiritual tattoo patterns, didn't notice that the surface of the gate to heaven, floating quietly in his sea of consciousness, suddenly flashed with a light, and then it instantly became calm again. At the same time, Lin Sun just finished the last line of the explosive flame spiritual tattoo. When the tip of the brush fell, a wisp of imperceptible breath quietly condensed in the tip of the brush. At this moment, Lin Sun felt as if his wrist was grasped by an invisible hand. Without any hesitation, he subconsciously turned the tip of the brush, and the last line came out of his hand so naturally and without any sluggishness. But when he raised his wrist and looked at the completed explosive flame spiritual tattoo. Lin Sun couldn't help but be stunned. It looked exactly the same as the one he was familiar with, but he always felt that there was a trace of unspeakable strangeness in this explosive flame spiritual tattoo. Was there something wrong with his mind? Before Lin Sun could perceive it carefully, he heard a buzzing sound. The surface of the swallow-winged saber, which used to be bright and clean, suddenly burst with dazzling light as if it was breathing, and then immediately became calm again. Looking at the surface of the swallow-winged saber, there was a touch of flame-like red light. Compared with the past, it had more compelling spirituality and dazzling sharpness. Seeing this scene, Lin Sun was immediately overwhelmed with endless joy. Without thinking about anything else, he raised his hand and picked up the saber. Boom! When the spiritual energy poured in, the swallow-winged saber suddenly burst into a dazzling light, illuminating the whole room. With a slight wave of the saber, Lin Sun could even hear bursts of explosions, like the eruption of magma and the explosion of flames. It was really a success. Lin Sun's eyes brightened, and he couldn't help but be in a trance. He was sure that the swallow-winged saber had transformed from an ordinary weapon into a real spiritual weapon. There was no doubt about it. Lin Sun didn't expect that he would succeed in refining a spiritual weapon for the first time in his life. Master Lu once said that no matter which spiritual tattooist refined a spiritual weapon, he would inevitably face the test of failure. Even the most experienced spiritual tattooist couldn't guarantee that he could refine a spiritual weapon at one time. In other words, it was normal to fail in refining a spiritual weapon, and it was abnormal not to fail. Why were spiritual weapons so expensive in today's market? The reason was that behind the refining of each spiritual weapon, there were often many failures, and each failure not only wasted spiritual materials and spiritual ink, but also the efforts of the spiritual tattooist. Generally speaking, in the eyes of all spiritual tattooists in the world, it was impossible for a spiritual apprentice at the 5th level of martial realm like Lin Sun to refine a spiritual weapon at all. But now Lin Sun not only refined a spiritual weapon, but also succeeded on the first time. Lin Sun couldn't help but be in a trance because of this sudden success. In order to refine a spiritual weapon this time, he had prepared 3 portions of spiritual ink and 3 swallow-winged sabers, in order to have another chance in case of failure. Who would have thought that all these preparations were in vain? It was so unexpected. Lin Sun stared at the swallow-winged saber. No, it should be called explosive flame saber now in a daze. Who could imagine that he, a spiritual apprentice at the 5th level of martial realm, could not only refine a spiritual weapon, but also succeed on the first time? If other spiritual tattooists in the world knew it, how would they feel? Thinking about it, Lin Sun couldn't help but show a playful smile, but finally he shook his head and made up his mind that unless he was beaten to death, he would never disclose this matter. Lin Sun had long understood that the tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. If this matter was known by others, it was bound to cause many unexpected disturbances. In the future, I will rely on you to make a fortune. Staring at the explosive flame saber, Lin Sun murmured to himself. He had made up his mind to sell this saber tomorrow. In order to refine a spiritual weapon, Lin Sun spent 60 silver coins just to buy 3 swallow-winged sabers and 3 plates of red fire spiritual ink. Plus the 30 silver coins he spent on renting a house and the money he spent on eating and drinking for the past 7 days. Lin Sun only had about 130 silver coins left from the original 300 silver coins he brought with him. If he didn't make money as soon as possible, it wouldn't take long for him to become poor. Fortunately, the explosive flame saber had been refined, which was a spiritual weapon and could be sold at a good price. Although Lin Sun didn't know the specific market price, he knew that even the worst spiritual weapon was worth more than 50 silver coins. This saber is more powerful than your saber. Are you really going to sell it? Xia Zhi's voice sounded. Lin Sun was surprised to find that Xia Zhi hadn't fallen asleep, even though it was early in the morning. She had been sitting beside him all the time, which was rare. This is a spiritual weapon. Only in the hands of gang spirit realm practitioners can its full power be exerted. Lin Sun said casually, "Of course, even if we don't talk about this, if I use this explosive flame saber, I'm sure I can exert more power than if I use sky-breaching saber. After all, it's a spiritual weapon, not an ordinary one." Speaking of this, Lin Sun couldn't help sighing. "It's a pity that we need money now, so we can only sell it first. If I have a chance later, I will refine one for myself." "Xia Ji said thoughtfully, "But I think the material of your saber is very strange. You'd better not lose it." Lin Sun couldn't help being moved. Of course, he knew that sky-breaching saber was extraordinary. It was a self-defense weapon given to him by Master Lu. According to Master Lu, the spiritual material used to cast this saber was so rare that even Master Lu himself couldn't inscribe spiritual tattoos on it. It could be imagined that the material of sky-breaching saber was unique. Since it hadn't been refined into a spiritual weapon, the unique material of sky-breaching saber had been buried. Chapter 68. The next morning, before dawn, Lin Sun had already got up and walked into the courtyard, practicing marching boxing casually. The wind generated by his fists was like a howling wind, shaking up waves in the air. Although marching boxing was a basic boxing method widely spread in the empire, few people could practice it to such a high level like Lin Sun. It was a pity that he still hadn't reached the level of mastery. He had mastered the essence and general trend of the boxing method, but he lacked a unique spirit, which belonged to his own martial style. Lin Sun knew clearly that if he wanted to make a breakthrough, he must go through a real battle and temper the spirit of the boxing method with blood and fire. After practicing for 30 minutes, when all his qi and blood were roaring like boiling water, Lin Sun stopped. He hurriedly washed his face and rinsed his mouth. After breakfast with Xia Ji, he pushed the door open and went out alone with a bag on his back. Today he was going to sell the explosive flame saber he had refined last night. Xia Ji was left at home by Lin Sun. The little girl was not interested in anything in Donglin town except reading. Lin Sun bought a lot of books for her these days, which were enough for her to read for many days. Even in the early morning, the civilian area was still quite gloomy, with intricate dilapidated buildings built randomly, forming long and narrow alleys like cobwebs. Walking in it was like walking in a maze. Fortunately, Lin Sun had a good memory, so he didn't get lost. But after walking for a short time, he seemed to notice something and stopped at once, saying, "My two friends, if you don't come out, don't blame me for being rude." Before his voice died away, two figures hurriedly walked out from the corner of the alley on one side. They were two men, one fat and one thin. As soon as they came out, the fat one shouted, "Young master, please calm down. We've been waiting here because we have something to discuss with you." Lin Sun raised his eyebrows. "What's the matter?" The fat one hesitated and glanced at the thin one beside him. The skinny man rolled his eyes and said with a flattering smile, "Young master, to tell you the truth, ever since you killed Snake Boss a few days ago, some people have started to break the rules. All kinds of dirty things have happened, causing many brothers and sisters who live nearby to be angry, but dare not say anything." Lin Sun didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was ridiculous that these two guys dared to complain that others did dirty things at first sight. The two of us were thinking that we couldn't afford to lose a leader in this area. So, we wanted to invite you, young master, to come out and hold the fort. The skinny man said quickly, "Of course, I won't let you work for nothing. According to the usual practice, as long as you are a beggar in this area, you will be given a sum of money every month. What do you think?" Lin Sun finally understood that these two guys wanted him to play the role of boss in a sense. But he was not interested in it, and he was even more disinclined to associate himself with the likes of ruffians, hooligans, thieves, and murderers. "Sorry, I'm not interested," Lin Sun said and walked away. Young master, young master." The fat one was so anxious that he wanted to stop Lin Sun. But when his eyes met Lin Sun's eyes, he suddenly trembled all over, feeling as if he was stabbed by a blade, and dared not to move again. "You two go. I said I'm not interested in it, so I will never intervene in this kind of thing," Lin Sun said lightly and soon disappeared in the depth of the alley. Seeing this, the fat one and the thin one were both depressed and sighed. Fatty Jiao, what should we do? I don't want to rely on Boss Bear. Because of Snake Boss, I offended a relative of Boss Bear. The thin one said with a sad face. Damn, since Snake Boss died, Boss Bear has been eager to take action and wants to put his hands in our area. He's going too far. Fatty Jiao gnashed his teeth and said, but it's a pity that this young master doesn't want to get involved. Alas, I don't know what to do now. This civilian district was very large, covering an area of dozens of miles. There were at least 100,000 people living here. Most of them were nobodies at the bottom of society. There were many people from all walks of life, thieves, ruffians, murderers, prostitutes. There were all kinds of people here. Naturally, gangs and gangs were born. It could be said that the order of the underground in the entire civilian area was completely controlled by more than 20 gangs. Each gang controlled an area, and there were often fights for territory. For example, Snake Boss, who was killed by Lin Sun a few days ago, was originally a gang leader in this area. As for Boss Bear, he was a gang leader in another area. But now, with the death of Snake Boss, Boss Bear seized the opportunity to encroach on the underground forces in this area. Damn, let's rely on Boss Liu. The thin one gnashed his teeth and said, Boss Liu is now the strongest of all the forces. Bones, are you muddle-headed? Boss Liu is greedy. If you follow him, be careful that Dark is involved. Fatty Jiao shook his head repeatedly. The thin one called Bones smiled bitterly and said, Then what do you think we should do? At this time, a light voice came from a distance. Why don't you rely on me? With the voice, a delicate and young figure appeared, wearing a black windbreaker with a hat covering her face. Obviously, she was Xia Ji, who was left at home to read books by Lin Sun. You? Fatty Jiao was stunned. The figure looked mysterious, but it was just a kid. Fatty Jiao's face darkened. He grinned hideously and said, Kiddo, how dare you make fun of me in broad daylight? Are you tired of living, Bang? Before his voice died away, Fatty Jiao felt that his chest was hit by a giant hammer. He flew backward uncontrollably and fell hard on the ground. All his bones were almost broken, and he screamed. The bones was dumbfounded. He didn't see it clearly, but Fatty Jiao was flying out. Xia Ji stepped forward, and her indifferent voice was filled with an undeniable coldness. From now on, I am the boss of this area, and you are my subordinates. Do you have any objection? The bones trembled all over. Although he might be facing a child, he couldn't help but feel a touch of fear in his heart. He shook his head repeatedly and said, No, no. What about you? Xia Ji looked at Fatty Jiao. Fatty Jiao's scream stopped abruptly. He suddenly climbed up and shouted, Absolutely no objection. From now on, we are your loyal subordinates. We will go through fire and water for you without hesitation. Bang! Xia Ji raised her palm and slapped Fatty Jiao's face across the air. He screamed and fell down like a gourd. Then Xia Ji said, I don't like to listen to nonsense. You only need to follow me and obey my orders. Meritorious deeds will be rewarded, and mistakes will be punished. Do you understand? Yes. The fat man and the thin man were completely awed and nodded repeatedly. Well, you go now and tell all your companions in this area that I am your boss from now on. Xia Ji nodded and turned to leave. Seeing this, Fatty Jiao breathed out a long, turbid breath with a look of lingering fear. Then he seemed to think of something and shouted, Boss! Xia Ji stopped. Anything else? Fatty Jiao trembled all over and said repeatedly, I just want to know what should I call you? Xia Ji suddenly fell into silence and said after a long time, Shuangmu. Shuangmu? Fatty Jiao and the bones looked at each other and made a mental note of it. Until Xia Ji's figure disappeared, the bones whispered, Are we really going to serve this boss Shuangmu? Fatty Jiao touched his red and swollen cheek and gasped, Idiot! Didn't you see the slap I just got just now? He hit me across the air. Damn it. Only practitioners in the gang spirit realm can do that. Now, in this civilian area, there are only 5 or 6 people who can do that, right? The bones immediately reacted and said happily, Now we are saved. Boss Xiong is only at the 8th level of martial realm. How can he compare with our boss Shuangmu? Fatty Jiao also became complacent. Although our boss Shuangmu looks like a child, he is actually a master. If we follow him in the future, maybe we can really make a name for ourselves. The Bones also said excitedly, "Then what are we waiting for? Tell others about it, and say that we have a new boss." Fatty Jiao nodded repeatedly. If Lin Sun saw this scene, it was unknown what he would think. In the center of the 800 Avenue, this was the most prosperous core area of Donglin Town, with tall buildings rising from the ground. The buildings were antique, with green bricks and yellow tiles and carved beams and painted pillars, which were very magnificent. The bustling crowd shuttled back and forth here, each of them dressed in gorgeous clothes, full of style. When Lin Sun arrived here, wearing coarse linen clothes and carrying a bag on his shoulder, he seemed a little conspicuous. From time to time, he could get some disgusted and disdainful eyes. Many young and beautiful women directly avoided him as soon as they saw him. This was not an exaggeration. The 800th Street was the most prosperous money-squandering establishment in the city. The shops, restaurants, and inns that were set up that were not places that ordinary people could spend their money on. Therefore, the people who could come and go in this area were mostly people from well-to-do families. Lin Sun's simple and clean dress became a symbol of poverty in the eyes of others. Lin Sun himself seemed to be unaware of this. He raised his head and looked into the distance, where there was a towering building of dozens of meters high. Keystone Business. Lin Sun thought for a while and finally walked in. In the Green Sun tribe, although Mu Wansu's attitude towards Lin Sun was a little bad, she still helped Lin Sun a lot. At this time, if he wanted to sell a spiritual weapon, it was reasonable for him to choose Keystone Business first. Besides, Lin Sun would not only sell this spiritual weapon, but also refine and sell more spiritual weapons in the future. He believed that Keystone Business would be very interested in it, and maybe they would start a long-term cooperation with him. After all, which merchant would refuse such benefits that were delivered to their doorstep? In any case, Lin Sun could give such benefits to Keystone Business at the first time out of the thought of repaying the kindness, rather than coveting more profits. Chapter 69. Compared with Keystone Business in Donglin Town, Keystone Business in Green Sun Tribe was inconspicuous. As soon as Lin Sun entered it, he felt like he had entered a magnificent palace. It was not only spacious, but also decorated with antique and exquisite antique decorations. Beautiful waitresses, like butterflies flying through flowers, walked beside every guest with a warm smile on their faces, neither humble nor arrogant. Even when they entertained Lin Sun, who was dressed plainly and simply, they were polite and impeccable in etiquette. The waitress took Lin Sun to the exchange area. Before long, an appraiser who called himself Wang came over and talked with Lin Sun for a while. Then he took the explosive flame saber and looked it up and down carefully. After a long time, Wang Lin raised his head and praised, "This explosive flame saber is of good quality. It can be regarded as the best among the low-grade spiritual weapons of human rank." "Child, are you really going to sell this treasure?" Lin Sun nodded with a smile. Wang Lin thought for a moment and said, "This treasure is worth 40 imperial silver coins. Are you satisfied with the price?" Lin Sun had just checked at the counter of Keystone Business. The price of a low-grade spiritual weapon of human rank was roughly between 30 imperial silver coins to 80 imperial silver coins. From this point of view, the price offered by Wang Lin was not very high, but not low either. Lin Sun didn't care about this. He was here to reach a long-term cooperation with Keystone Business, which could be regarded as a repayment. However, at this time, a maid hurriedly came over. She invited Wang Lin to the side and whispered something to him. Very quickly, Wang Lin returned and said apologetically, "Young master, please wait a moment. There is an urgent matter that I need to deal with." Lin Sun nodded. Wang Lin left in a hurry. He didn't let Lin wait for long before he returned. However, he seemed to have something on his mind and was a little absent-minded. Lin Sun thought for a moment and took the initiative to say, "Brother Wang, this spiritual weapon." Before Lin Sun finished, Wang Lin waved his hand and said, "Sorry, Keystone Business won't do this business anymore." Please forgive us, child. Won't do it anymore. Lin Sun raised his eyebrows and felt a little surprised. Why did this guy's attitude change so much after he left? Sorry, please forgive us, child. Wang Lin's expression also became indifferent, which made Lin's heart sink. He vaguely guessed something. Suppressing his displeasure, he stood up and said, If so, I won't bother you anymore. Take care, young master. I won't see you out. Wang Lin's voice was cold and distant. Lin suddenly asked, Did Mu Wansu ask you to do this? Wang Lin was stunned. His face slightly changed as he asked, Young master, what do you mean? Lin Sun saw his expression and knew the answer in his heart. He couldn't help shaking his head. Forget it. Without any hesitation, Zhang Xian left with large strides. Wang Lin sat in a daze for a long time. Finally, he let out a long sigh and stood up to leave. On the bustling street, Lin Sun turned his head and glanced at the magnificent and towering building of Keystone Business, with a smile on his lips. Lin knew that Mu Wansu had always disliked him, especially after he suppressed Wu Business with the help of Yin Zhen last time. Mu Wansu disliked him more and more. But no matter what, he owed Keystone Business a favor, which could be regarded as Shi Xuan's or Mu Wansu's. Therefore, Lin Sun wouldn't resent Mu Wansu for being rejected today. It was just a business. Since Mu Wansu didn't want it, he would sell it to others. Mu Wansu is really vengeful. Isn't she worried that I would be shameless enough to harass her again and again with Shi Xuan's token? What could she do to me at that time? It's a pity that I'm not thick-skinned enough. Lin Sun shook his head with some self-mockery. Well, judging from her attitude, I'm afraid she intends to draw a line with me. In that case, I'll stay away from Keystone Business in the future. Lin Sun stopped thinking about it and began to walk along the 800 Avenue, observing the various shops on both sides of the street. But soon, someone took the initiative to find Lin Sun. It was a plain-looking man, but his behavior was quite capable and calm. Child, if I'm not mistaken, you just went to Keystone Business to sell the treasures, right? The man cupped his hands with a smile, and his voice was gentle and clear, giving people a comfortable feeling like a spring breeze. This was the temperament of a person, which was inadvertently revealed from his speech and behavior, which made this plain-looking man more amiable and difficult to make people feel disgusted. Exactly. Lin Sun nodded. Let me guess again. You must feel that the price offered by Keystone Business is not right, so you didn't make the deal in the end, right? The man continued, with a clear voice and a warm smile. Yes. Lin Sun nodded again. He just entered Keystone Business with a bag and came out with a bag. Anyone could see this if they paid attention to it. The man smiled and introduced himself. I'm Gu Yinping. Now I have opened a shop called Golden Hall. If you don't mind, would you like to have a chat in my shop? Lin Sun also smiled. Shopkeeper Gu, how dare I refuse your kind invitation? Both of them smiled brightly. Golden Hall was located at the west end of the 800 Avenue. Compared with the prosperity of the central area, this area was relatively deserted. The shop of Golden Hall was not big. It was just a two-story building with green tiles. But when you walked in, you found that although this shop could not be compared with Keystone Business, it was neat and elegant, and ingenuity could be seen everywhere. But the only embarrassing thing was that when Lin Sun walked in, he found that there was no customer in the whole Golden Hall except himself. Gu Yinping looked calm and said with a smile, My shop has been open for only dozens of days, so there are few customers. Sorry to make you laugh at me. From Lin Sun's point of view, the goods sold in the shops could only be described as scarce and scarce. Some of the counters were even empty, with only the names of the items they were selling marked on them. If an ordinary person entered this shop, they would have some doubts. Could it be that this shop was an empty shell? From this point, Lin Sun roughly judged that Golden Fish Pond could not compare with other businesses in terms of financial resources and background. The only advantage it had was that this shop was located on the 800 Avenue. However, what Gu Yinping said next greatly surprised Lin Sun. Gu Yinping looked calm and said frankly, Child, I know you have a lot of doubts in your mind. To tell you the truth, even the shop is rented by me, and with my financial resources, I can only pay for half a year's rent. Lin Sun was stunned and said after a while, Shopkeeper Gu, Why do you tell me this? Gu Yinping said seriously, integrity is the most important thing in business, and the biggest advantage I have now is integrity. If I want to develop Golden Hall in the future, it is also inseparable from integrity, so I dare not hide it from you, young master. Lin Sun nodded. He suddenly found that Gu Yinping was a wonderful person. From the very beginning, Gu Yinping had shown extraordinary observation skills. His way of receiving guests was also quite good. He was sincere but particular, which made people unable to dislike him at all. In that case, please have a look at this saber, shopkeeper Gu. Lin Sun took out the explosive flame saber and handed it over. Gu Yinping gladly accepted the order. He took the explosive flame saber and looked at it carefully for a long time. Then he nodded and said, "It's a top-grade spiritual weapon of lower grade of human rank, worth between 200 and 300 imperial silver coins." Lin Sun thought of Wang Lin's evaluation in Keystone business and couldn't help nodding. It showed that Gu Yinping was also good at appraising treasures. He said casually, 40 imperial silver coins, and this saber is yours. Gu Yinping didn't expect Lin Sun to be so straightforward. After thinking for a while, he said decisively, "Thank you, child. But business is business. My offer is 50 imperial silver coins." As he said, he took out a money bag and took out 50 imperial silver coins, handing them to Lin Sun. "Please accept it, child." Lin Sun put them away silently and said, "Shopkeeper Gu, now I believe that you are sincere in doing business with me. If I sell any spiritual weapons in the future, Golden Hall will be my first choice." Gu Yinping smiled and cupped his hands. "Thank you for taking care of my shop, child." Lin Sun nodded and then left. "Father, we don't have much money in our account." As soon as Lin Sun left, a teenager came out and said helplessly, "Why do you still spend so much money? I think it won't take long for our shop to close down." The young man's name was Gu Liang, and he was the only son of Gu Yinping. When he heard this, he said disapprovingly, "Liang, remember, in the path of doing business, not only does it require boldness and long-term vision, it also requires the courage to cut off all means of retreat." After a pause, Gu Yinping looked resolute and said, "With the resources we have now, if we maintain the business by normal means, there is no way to survive at all. Therefore, we must boldly fight for it. If we succeed, Golden Hall can completely establish a foothold in the 800th Street." Gu Liang couldn't help asking, "What if we fail?" Gu Yinping was silent for a long time, and then he said indifferently, "Then I'll pack up and leave. Since I was expelled from my family by those old guys in Sursa City, I thoroughly understand one thing. If I want to do something, I must rely on myself." As he said this, he picked up the explosive flame saber and walked into the inner chamber. At the mention of being expelled from his family, Gu Liang's eyes suddenly flashed with a fiery anger, which immediately turned into calmness. In the inner chamber, Gu Yinping's expression was focused and composed. He stood there casually with his left hand holding up the saber, and he seemed to have become a different person. His eyes were filled with absolute confidence, as if everything was within his grasp, and this caused his mediocre appearance to carry a wisp of strange charm. All of a sudden, the 5 fingers of Gu Yinping's right hand, like a blooming lotus, interlocked layer by layer, instantly pinched a strange handprint and gently printed it on the surface of the explosive flame saber. Clang! With a clear sound, the surface of the saber was suddenly covered with a flame boiling like lava, burning fiercely, dispelling the darkness in the inner chamber and making Gu Yinping's face red. "Good saber." Although it was a compliment, his expression was calm and indifferent, without any ripples, as if he had been used to this kind of scene. At the same time, the 5 fingers of his right hand changed again, and his fingertips hit the surface of the explosive flame saber in a unique rhythm like playing a zither. Boom! On the sharp tip of the saber, a brilliant saber light like red sunset suddenly burst out, constantly swallowing and spitting, flashing an extremely dangerous breath. Good saber. Chapter 70. Gu Liang was waiting quietly. 2 hours had passed, but there was no movement in the inner chamber, which made Gu Liang confused. Since the opening of Golden Hall, his father, Gu Yinping, had purchased 7 treasures, including spiritual armors, spiritual spears, and spiritual swords, all of which were combat spiritual weapons. However, the quality of these spiritual weapons was not satisfactory, and the quality could only be regarded as average. Besides, they were very common spiritual weapons on the market, so they had not been sold so far. This made Gu Yang doubt whether his father's method was feasible. What worried Gu Yang the most was that just the cost of renting this shop, in addition to the money spent to buy the 7 spirit weapons, was about to exhaust all of their savings. If this situation continued, it would not take many days for Golden Hall to completely close down. At that time, I'm afraid I can only pack up and leave with my tail between my legs, right? Gu Yang sighed in his heart, but he had admired his father since he was a child. Therefore, although he questioned his father's method, he had never strongly opposed it. Well, it's no big deal to leave. As long as I don't starve to death, there will be a day when I make a comeback. Gu Yang took a deep breath and abandoned the distractions in his mind. Inheriting many advantages of Gu Yinping, he knew that in some things, one should do one's best and leave it to fate. Worrying too much would make one's mind chaotic. At this moment, the door of the inner chamber was pushed open and Gu Yinping came out. To Gu Yang's surprise, his father in front of him seemed to have become another person, full of joy and radiance, as if he had become many years younger in an instant. "Liang, it's time for us to make a comeback." Gu Yinping laughed. "Father, what do you mean?" Gu Yang was puzzled. The explosive flame saber that child just used is extraordinary. Gu Yinping couldn't help being excited when he thought of his own verification. Its power is about 20% stronger than that of other explosive flame sabers. 20%. A low-grade human-rank spiritual weapon has the power of a middle-grade human-rank spiritual weapon. Which explosive flame saber can compare with it in the world? Gu Yang's body trembled, and he was a little surprised. Is it really 20% more power? As far as he knew, explosive flame saber was also a very common spiritual weapon on the market. Even the best explosive flame saber could not increase its power by 20% out of thin air. Explosive flame saber was refined by a spiritual tattooist, so its material and spiritual tattoo pattern had long been fixed and could not be changed at all. This also meant that the power of the explosive flame saber could no longer have a breakthrough. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an explosive flame saber. That was why Gu Yang was surprised when he heard Gu Yinping's words. Gu Yinping understood this very well. Even he was shocked when he received the result just now, thinking that his eyes were playing tricks on him. But the facts proved that all of this was true. "Liang, when I appraise treasures, I use the flying spirit treasure seeking technique. You should understand what it means." Gu Yinping casually explained. Gu Yang was completely stunned. Flying spirit treasure seeking technique. This was a secret technique passed down by their ancestors. It was a secret technique that was specially used to appraise treasures. Ever since their ancestors had used this technique to appraise treasures, there had never been a single mistake. This is actually real. Gu Yang couldn't help but be in a trance. An ordinary explosive flame saber's power can soar by 20%. If the spiritual tattooists in the world hear this, I'm afraid it will cause a great disturbance. Gu Yinping also sighed with emotion. I don't know who refined this treasure. It's a pity that the child left in a hurry at that time. Otherwise, we can inquire about it. Gu Yang laughed. Father, I'm afraid that the person who refined such a treasure is a spiritual tattooist with extraordinary attainments, or even a spiritual tattooist grandmaster. It's not easy to see such a person. Gu Yinping pondered for a long time, but shook his head and said, Let's not talk about this. Go and contact some people to spread the news for me. Let's say that Golden Hall accidentally obtained a peerless saber. Who in the world can get it? We must shout out this slogan. Gu Yang rolled his eyes and smiled like a little fox. Peerless saber? Gu Yinping also laughed. Isn't it? This slogan is just a gimmick often used by merchants to arouse some criticism. This way, they can attract more attention. Gu Yang nodded and said, Leave it to me. Gu Yinping's eyes were full of confidence and heroism. Whether Golden Hall can gain a firm foothold in Donglin Town depends on whether this shot can make a big impact. Keystone business. After Lin Sun left, Wang Lin hurriedly walked into the depths of the hall and walked into a quiet and secluded courtyard after a few turns. In the courtyard, there were waterside pavilions, small bridges, and flowing water. Mu Wansu, in a black dress, sat lazily in a pavilion and was looking through an account book. Her black hair was coiled into a bun, revealing a snow-white gooseneck. Her side face was as white as mutton fat jade, outlining a stunning arc in the warm sunshine. It had to be said that Mu Wansu was indeed a rare beauty. But when Wang Lin walked into the courtyard, he dared not look up at Mu Wansu. He bowed his head and said respectfully, "Miss Wansu, Lin Sun has retreated in the face of difficulties. I thought he had understood the meaning of keystone business." Mu Wansu closed the account book in her hand, and a smile appeared on her full and ruddy red lips. She said slowly, "I thought he could stay in Donglin town for a few days. I didn't expect that in less than 10 days, he had to come to sell his spiritual weapon. It seems that he has understood that it is not so easy to gain a foothold in Donglin town." Speaking of this, Mu Wansu suddenly asked, "Didn't he react at all?" In Mu Wansu's view, Lin Sun was a cunning and shameless little bastard. How could he leave obediently after being refused at the door? Wang Lin was stunned and said, "He seemed to know that all this was arranged by you, miss, so he didn't show any emotion when he left." Hearing this, Mu Wansu inexplicably felt something wrong in her heart, but she immediately shook her head disapprovingly, thinking that she had worried too much. Since the first day Lin Sun entered Donglin town, she had seen all his actions. She knew that Lin Sun had to live in the dirty and chaotic place known as the slum because he was short of money. She also knew that he seemed to be thinking about how to gain a foothold in Donglin town. Originally, Mu Wansu thought that although this cunning and shameless young man was not a good person, his means were quite good. Maybe he could really survive in Donglin town by his own means. But today, when she learned that Lin Sun came to Keystone Business with a spiritual weapon to sell, Mu Wansu immediately realized that this boy might be desperate and couldn't hold on any longer. Otherwise, how could a practitioner in martial realm like him be willing to sell a spiritual weapon? This made Mu Wansu feel happy and gloat at the same time. Was this the person the young master had taken a fancy to? Without the help of Keystone Business, Lin Sun was too useless to make a move in Donglin town. If the young master knew this, what would he think? "Miss Wansu, I see that the treasures Lin Sun sells are extraordinary in appearance. I'm afraid there are many secrets in them. It's a pity to miss them." Wang Lin didn't understand Mu Wansu's mind. As a treasure appraiser, what he cared about was related to what he was good at. It's just a low-grade spiritual weapon of human rank. What's the big deal? Mu Wansu didn't take it seriously. But according to my observation, although the grade of this explosive flame saber is not worth mentioning, its appearance seems to be different from other explosive flame sabers, Wang Lin said quickly. Mu Wansu frowned and said, "No matter how different it is, it's just an explosive flame saber. Why are you so persistent? You can leave now." Wang Lin sighed in his heart, shook his head, and turned away. "Little bastard, after you sell the spiritual weapon, let's see what else you can sell. Keystone Business won't let you take advantage of us anymore." Mu Wansu smiled gently and continued to review the accounts. For her, what happened just now was just a trifle, not worthy of too much attention. What she really wanted to know was how many days Lin Sun could stay in Donglin town. Lin Sun didn't know what happened in Keystone Business after he left, nor did he know that Gu Yinping and his son were now full of ambition and eager to show off their skills. After selling the explosive flame saber and getting 50 imperial silver coins, Lin Sun began to browse in the 800th Street with a happy mood. A swallow-wing saber and a plate of red fire spiritual ink were worth 20 imperial silver coins, but the explosive flame saber refined by Lin Sun was sold for 50 imperial silver coins, more than double the original price. Most importantly, he would be able to continuously refine more spiritual weapons in the future. This was the fundamental reason why Lin Sun was in a good mood, as if he had seen a glittering road to wealth under his feet. "When I have enough money, maybe I should buy some blood-refining pills to prepare for breaking through to the 6th level of martial realm. Lin Sun calculated quickly. He had seen the blood-refining elixir in Keystone Business of Green Sun Tribe. It was an extremely precious elixir. It was said that it was refined from hundreds of spiritual herbs, and one elixir was worth 10 silver coins. It was extremely expensive, but it was normal. With the improvement of cultivation, the quality of the spiritual medicine needed by practitioners also increased, and the corresponding spiritual medicine was more expensive. For example, in the first level of martial realm, one only needed to eat some spiritual grains and spiritual vegetables. But when one wanted to advance to a higher level, the effect of spiritual grains and spiritual vegetables was far from enough. Moreover, Ling medicine was not only used to replenish Ling power. When a cultivator cultivated to different realms, the effects of the Ling medicine they needed were also different. What? A strange feeling suddenly arose in Lin Sun's heart, and he immediately woke up from his chaotic thoughts. He couldn't help turning his head to take a look, only to find that the nearby streets were bustling with pedestrians like water. He didn't find anything unusual. Immediately, Lin Sun shook his head, turned around, and walked into the depths of an alley on one side of the street. Not long after Lin Sun's figure disappeared, two men with ordinary appearance and clothes suddenly walked out of the nearby crowd. They were no different from the passers-by on the street, but at this time, their eyes were fixed on the alley where Lin Sun left. Old Dao, the target seems to have noticed us. Shall we continue to track him? A dark-skinned man frowned. Chapter 71. The man called Old Dao pondered for a while and said decisively, "Go after him." The two of them walked into the alley in a flash. It was a civilian area nearby. The winding alleys crisscrossed like a spiderweb maze, dark and damp. Old Dao didn't go far when they suddenly found that the figure of the target had disappeared. "Old dog, can you still smell that boy?" Old Dao frowned and asked. "It's not far ahead," the old dog answered quickly. Old Dao nodded and continued to move forward, but he felt a little uneasy. This alley was extremely narrow and long, less than 3 meters wide. It was deserted along the way. Even in broad daylight, it was extremely dark and damp. "Old dog, we have to be careful. Although it's perfectly justified to work for money, it's all in vain if you die." Old Dao felt something was wrong and couldn't help reminding Old Dao in a low voice. "Hey, he's just a little guy from a remote village. What's more, we're just following the target, not fighting him." Old Dog didn't take it seriously. "Anyway, it's better to be careful." Old Dao frowned. Of course, Old Dog didn't take it seriously, and then he exclaimed, "How could this be?" The target's breath disappeared here. Old Dao was stunned, and then his heart suddenly thumped. He knew something was wrong. Bang! At this moment, a black shadow suddenly fell from the sky, as fast as a ghost. Old Dao felt dizzy, and then he saw Old Dog's body shake violently, as if he was struck by lightning, and then he knelt on the ground. "You're courting death." Old Dao reacted very quickly. With a roar, he pulled out his saber and chopped at the figure. The black shadow was Lin Sun. Before Old Saber attacked, he had already jumped into Old Saber's arms like a cannonball. At the same time, he stretched out his palms and fingers, grasped Old Saber's wrist joint like lightning, and shook it hard. Bang! The horrible power hit Old Dao's body like a tide, shaking his limbs and bones as if they were broken. All his strength collapsed, and blood spurted from his mouth and nose. Then, he fell to the ground with a bang. Dizzy and in pain, he could no longer stand up. This collision occurred abruptly, and then it ended in an instant. It was inconceivably swift, decisive, ruthless, and swift. It was also at this moment that Dagger finally saw the appearance of the attacker. It was their target. But Dagger had never imagined that a 13 or 14-year-old boy could be so ruthless and decisive, which was not something a teenager should have. Lin Sun stepped forward and said with a smile, "Tell me what I want to know. If you don't, I will ask him. If you cooperate well, I can let you die a quick death." He pointed at the unconscious old dog in the distance. His words made Dagger realize that the young man in front of him was not a fledgling at all. But Dagger refused to admit defeat. He gritted his teeth and said, "Do you know who we are?" Crack! Lin Sun smiled without saying a word, but crushed one of Dagger's palms with the tip of his foot. The flesh was badly mutilated, and the bones were all broken. Dagger was about to scream in pain when a stone was stuffed into his mouth. Looking at Dagger's ferocious and painful face, Lin Sun still looked warm and calm, and said softly, "Believe me, I have learned many ways to torture people since I was a child. There are more than 1,000 of them. If you want to have a try, you don't have to speak." Dagger's expression changed, and his body trembled because of the severe pain. His eyes were about to burst and bleed. He stared at the young man in front of him, and his heart was shaken. Crack! Lin Sun was still smiling, but under the tip of his foot, Dagger's other hand was completely destroyed. The pain made Dagger whimper, and his face twisted and hideous. This youth looked delicate, handsome, and warm, and had a harmless appearance. However, his experienced and efficient methods were even more ruthless than an executioner who was proficient in torture. He was not a young man, but a little devil. When Dagger saw Lin Sun squatting down, took out a pale cyan dagger, and was about to continue the torture, Dagger completely collapsed. Fear flooded his heart, and he couldn't help nodding crazily. Lin Sun smacked his lips with a little regret. "I thought you would be a tough bone. Who would have thought that you couldn't stand it before the torture started?" Hearing this, Dagger twitched all over. Hadn't the torture started? Lin Sun stopped smiling and looked at Dagger calmly. "In this case, I won't embarrass you any further. I ask and you answer. I hope you don't lie to me. I will ask your companion to answer these questions again. If you two give different answers, you should know what the consequences will be." Dagger completely gave up and lost the ability to resist. He nodded. When Lin Sun came out from the other end of the alley, there were 2 dead bodies in the dark behind him. Maybe it wouldn't be long before they were devoured by passing wild dogs. Lin Sun didn't care about this at all. Carrying the candied fruits, spiritual fruits, roasted meat, and various snacks he bought on the street, he walked leisurely towards his home. The warm sunset forced a ray of light through the high part of the alley, dispelling the darkness, and plated the thin figure of the young man with a warm luster. Anyone who saw this handsome and warm young man on the outside would never think that he would use such a cruel and bloody method to end the lives of 2 people. This was Lin Sun. Growing up in a dark environment, he was destined to be different from his peers. Lien Fei, Clan of Wu. Lin Sun sorted out his thoughts along the way. Dagger and Old Dog had told him everything, which made Lin Sun realize that he had been targeted by Clan of Wu since the first day he entered Donglin Town. This surprised Lin Sun. Clan of Wu was Wu Henshui's family, and also the force behind Green Sun Tribe's Wu business. Lin Sun had thought that with Keystone Business's help, Clan of Wu would not dare to make trouble for him no matter how much they hated him. But now it seemed that they obviously didn't give up. According to Dagger, on the first day Lin Sun entered Donglin Town, Clan of Wu found Lien Fei and carried out a secret plot. The content of the plot was very simple: to kill Lin Sun. However, Clan of Wu would not do it in person, but let Lien Fei take full responsibility for it. Clan of Wu would stand behind Lien Fei and provide him with all financial and resource support. This was what surprised Lin Sun. Lien Fei was the son of Lien Rufeng. But what Lin Sun didn't expect was that Clan of Wu would find Lien Fei and ask him a deal with him. But after thinking for a while, Lin Sun understood why Lien Fei agreed to do this. Lien Rufeng, his father, was killed by Lin Sun. As a son, how could Lien Fei not take revenge for his father's death? Driving the wolf to devour the tiger? Clan of Wu really has a good plan? Lin Sun sneered in his heart. It was obvious that Clan of Wu was still afraid of Keystone Business, so they didn't dare to deal with him openly and could only act through Lien Fei. For example, Dagger and Old Dog, who followed Lin Sun this time, were spies hired by Lien Fei. Their purpose was to collect all traces of Lin Sun, so as to provide intelligence support for Lien Fei's next action. At the same time, according to Dagger, Lien Fei had recruited many bloodthirsty outlaws with the financial support of Clan of Wu. All of them valued money more than life. They were waiting for an opportunity to give Lin Sun a fatal blow. In this case, although Lin Sun was not afraid of Lien Fei, He couldn't help but feel a headache when he thought that they had been secretly planning to kill him and might appear at any time. How could one be a thief for 1,000 days and guard against a thief for 1,000 days? However, Lin Sun learned that Lin Fei was 15 years old this year and had reached the 5th level of martial realm. He was now a student of Donglin School. According to Dagger, Lin Fei's mind was now on the county test in a month, so he hadn't killed Lin Sun yet. According to this information, Lin Sun could at least judge that if Lin Fei really wanted to kill him, he might do it after the county test in a month. But this was just Lin Sun's judgment. If Lin Fei knew that Lin Sun had discovered his plot, he might take action in advance. It seems that I have to hurry to collect some intelligence about clan of Wu and Lin Fei. A killing intent surged in Lin Sun's heart. What he hated most was to be schemed against and framed. Since clan of Wu still didn't give up, how could Lin Sun just sit still and wait for death? However, the current situation was that the enemy was in the dark while he was in the light. Lin Sun didn't know the specific situation of clan of Wu, so the urgent task was to understand the enemy's actual situation and make a plan before taking action. While thinking, Lin Sun had unconsciously walked to the door of his house. He immediately dispelled the distracting thoughts and pushed the door open. Lin Sun suddenly saw 2 figures standing in the courtyard, one fat and one thin. His eyes suddenly became cold, and his killing intent burst out. Almost at the same time, the 2 men, one fat and one thin, also turned their heads and saw Lin Sun. A flattering smile appeared on their faces at once. But when they met Lin Sun's cold eyes that were as sharp as a blade, their faces froze and they couldn't help but tremble. "What are you doing here?" Lin Sun recognized these 2 people. They were Fatty Jiao and the Bones. He immediately felt at ease and hid the killing intent in his eyes. At this time, Fatty Jiao and the Bones also secretly breathed a sigh of relief. They bowed together and said loudly, "Greetings, Lord Shuangmu." Shuangmu, Lord? When he heard this title, Lin Sun couldn't help but be stunned. Wasn't this title too unpleasant to hear? Lin Sun glanced at him and then looked at the closed door. An idea came to his mind, and he went straight in. After entering the room, he saw Xia Ji sitting at the desk, reading quietly. "What's going on outside?" Lin Sun asked. How could he not know that with Xia Ji here, it was impossible for Fatty Jiao and the Bones to break into his house with their ability, unless Xia Ji let them in. They are your subordinates. Xia Ji put down the book in her hand, thought for a moment, and said, "I wanted to be their leader, but later I felt it was a little troublesome. So I give the title to you." Looking at the serious expression on the quiet and white face of the little girl, Lin Sun's face became gloomy. What he hated most was to let Xia Ji be contaminated with the dark and dirty things. But now, she took the initiative to get in touch with these dark things. How could she not learn bad things when she got involved with those ruffians, hooligans, rascals, murderers, and gangsters? Chapter 72. Lin Sun was rarely flustered and exasperated. He rushed out of the room and drove Fatty Jiao and the Bones out with a gloomy face. Then he took a deep breath and returned to the room. He looked at Xia Ji and said seriously, "Why do you do this?" Xia Ji's face was also full of seriousness. She asked, "Haven't you promised me?" Lin Sun was stunned. "Why did I promise you?" Xia Ji said to fight. Lin Sun stared at Xia Ji in silence. Xia Ji also stared at Lin Sun with a pair of clear crescent eyes. Until the atmosphere in the room was so dull that it was difficult to breathe, Lin Sun sighed, "Let's eat first." He turned around and began to clean up the table. He spread the candied plums, spiritual fruits, roasted meat, and snacks on the table one by one. Then they began to eat in silence. The extremely sumptuous dinner tasted like wax to Lin Sun. He finally put down his chopsticks and said, "I'm just a little worried about you." Xia Ji nodded and said, "I understand." Lin Sun said in a low voice, "You don't understand. I've lived with those evil people since I was a child. I've seen many dark and bloody things. So I know very well that once I get involved with such people, I'll definitely be influenced by them in the future." Xia Ji thought for a while and said, "But you're alive now, aren't you?" Lin Sun said grumpily, I'm different from you. Xia Ji said seriously, I'm different from you. Although the words were awkward, Lin Sun understood the meaning and couldn't help but sigh again. At this moment, Xia Ji put down her bowl and chopsticks and looked at Lin Sun. I know what I'm doing, but if you're really angry, I'll choose to retreat. Her eyebrows were picturesque, and there was a touch of firmness in her tranquil expression. Lin Sun was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he smiled and shook his head. No, I just want to confirm your attitude. Now I've seen it, so I won't oppose it anymore. Xia Ji nodded. Lin Sun filled another bowl of rice for Xia Ji and said, Be careful these days. The clan of Wu may not let us go. Xia Ji raised her head and asked, What are you going to do? Lin Sun shrugged and said, Let's find out their actual situation first, and then take action. This time we have to solve this problem by ourselves. A trace of coldness flashed in the depths of summer solstice's clear eyes, but it disappeared in a flash. After dinner, Summer Solstice got up and said that she was going out. Lin Sun wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. In the end, he didn't ask what Xia Ji was going to do, but he still guessed something and could only sigh in his heart. However, Lin Sun was not worried about Xia Ji's safety. Her fighting strength was not ordinary, and even Lin Sun was not her opponent. He believed that as long as Xia Ji was careful, there should not be any danger when dealing with the monsters in the civilian area. Abandoning the distractions in his mind, Lin sat at the desk, took out a swallow-wing saber and a plate of red fire spiritual ink, and devoted himself to refining explosive flame saber. Today's harvest in Golden Hall enabled Lin Sun to find a way to make money. In order to cultivate better in the future, making money was the most important part of his current life. 6 hours later, the swallow-wing saber on the desk suddenly lit up. Strands of glaring flames surged up and rumbled like molten lava. Once again, he succeeded. Looking at the explosive flame saber in his hand, Lin Sun couldn't help but nod with satisfaction. If Mr. Liu knew that I could refine a low-grade human-rank spiritual weapon with only the cultivation of the 5th level of martial realm and did it in one try, without any failure, he would be very happy, wouldn't he? Inexplicably, Lin Sun thought of Master Liu and the huge hand that destroyed the mine prison. A moment later, Lin Sun suddenly picked up the purple pheasant inscribing pen and inscribed a spiritual tattoo mark on the hilt of the explosive flame saber, which looked like an ancient character sun. Lin Sun still remembered that every time Master Liu inscribed a spiritual tattoo, he would leave a similar mark. According to Master Liu, this mark represented himself, and it was a unique mark belonging to a spiritual tattooist. As long as you saw this mark, you would know who the owner of the spiritual tattoo was. The sun inscribed by Lin Sun was not only his name, but also a kind of will in a sense. He was going to find the enemy who dug out the spiritual vein in his body. It was late at night, but Xia Ji hadn't come back yet. Lin Sun sat cross-legged on the bed and regulated his spiritual energy, but he was a little worried. Fortunately, when Lin Sun finished his practice, Xia Ji also came back. She was still wearing a black windbreaker, and her beautiful face was covered under the hat. She was no different from before. Lin Sun looked at her carefully for a long time and finally made sure that she was not injured. He said, Come back earlier in the future. Xia Ji answered, washed up a little, and lay quietly on the bed. Lin Sun blew out the candle, and the room suddenly fell into darkness. Only some faint starlight seeped in through the window lattice, sprinkling blurred light spots. Dogs barked occasionally in the distant alley, which made the atmosphere in the room quieter. Lin Sun, I killed a gang boss in another area. I don't remember his name, but I've gathered all his subordinates. In the darkness, Xia Ji opened her crescent-shaped eyes and said softly, About tomorrow, there will be a sum of spoils. I asked them to exchange all of them for money. You're short of money, right? When they send the money tomorrow, you can use it. Lin Sun was practicing meditating magic and visualizing his spirit, so he didn't hear what Xia Ji said. Xia Ji didn't seem to care whether Lin Sun could hear her or not. She continued, I also sent people to investigate the news about the clan of Wu. You don't know that although those local ruffians are bad people, they can get in touch with a lot of things that we can't. Fatty Jiao has promised that he will find out all the news tomorrow. Her eyes were as clear as a pair of black gems that had just been washed with water, and her voice was clear and ethereal, which sounded very pleasant in the quiet night in the dark room. Anyway, you don't have to worry about anything as long as I'm here. Do you think I don't see Mu Wansu's bad attitude towards you? That woman is narrow-minded. Sooner or later, I will teach her a lesson. But at that time, don't be as angry as you are today. Speaking of this, Xia Ji's voice was a little low, and she seemed to be a little depressed. After a long silence, a low, almost inaudible voice sounded in the darkness. My name is Xia Ji. Ever since I was a child, my world has been filled with darkness. But you, let me see a ray of light. Lin Sun's sea of consciousness was also dark, except for a bright star hanging in the sky. That was the first star lit up in his sea of consciousness when he practiced meditating magic. It poured out clear silver starlight to nourish his spirit. This star was also called the soul star. The more soul stars lit up, the better it was for the cultivation of the soul. Until the scene of the universe surrounded by stars was condensed in the night sky of the sea of consciousness. The first realm of meditating magic, star circulation, could be regarded as the consummation. However, Lin Sun's current soul realm barely entered the threshold of star circulation, and he only lit one soul star, which was still far from the consummation. Strands of starlight drifted about like gentle ripples of water, and they silently nourished the soul. At this moment, Lin Sun's mind was clear and pure, and he could clearly feel his perception power was constantly recovering. Whether it was refining spiritual weapons last night or tonight, Lin Sun not only consumed his spiritual energy, but also his soul perception power. Generally speaking, spiritual tattooists needed to rest for at least 2 or 3 days, or even 10 days or half a month, to recover the consumed perception power after refining a spiritual weapon. But for Lin Sun, who had meditating magic, all this was no longer a problem. When his perception power was exhausted, he only needed to visualize the image of star circulation, and he could completely recover overnight. In addition, Lin Sun found that the constant consumption and recovery of his soul perception was also a kind of refining of his soul power. Especially when his perception was greatly consumed, the effect of practicing meditating magic was much better than before. It was like expelling the old and taking in the new, so that the soul could be constantly refined and improved in the consumption and recovery. Just like at this moment, Lin Sun clearly noticed that when his perception power recovered, he felt full and ready to move. He didn't stop this impulse. Almost naturally, his perception power suddenly erupted and soared infinitely. In a trance, he seemed to fly to the distant starry sky again. When Lin Sun woke up, he immediately noticed that a dim star in the night sky of his sea of consciousness suddenly became bright and clear, echoing the first bright star in the distance. After more than 2 months, Lin Sun lit up another soul star. At the same time, his soul produced a tingling tremble, as if a new window had been opened. Lin Sun only felt that his soul power suddenly rose. In the past, he could only perceive the scene within a radius of 30 meters. But now, he could see everything within 60 meters in his mind. At the same time, Lin Sun's 6 senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, became more sensitive and transparent. He could clearly perceive the subtle changes in the surrounding air and the floating dust in the air. It seemed that the whole world had changed all of a sudden, and there was a magnificent and layered picture, which made Lin Sun feel a little intoxicated. This was the seeing the whole picture of soul power. The reason why practitioners were so powerful was that they could see what ordinary people couldn't see, perceive the mysteries of heaven and earth that ordinary people couldn't perceive, and master the power that ordinary people couldn't master. When Lin Sun woke up from his cultivation, the sky outside was already bright, and a new day had come. And on this new day, The news that Golden Hall wanted to sell a peerless saber spread rapidly in the streets and alleys of Donglin Town like a storm, causing a lot of noise. Chapter 73. The next morning, Wang Lin hurried out of Keystone Business and walked to the west of the 800 Avenue. He was a little absent-minded, thinking about the origin of Golden Hall. How dare they say they want to sell a peerless saber? Why had he never heard of a shop named Golden Hall on the 800 Avenue before? Just yesterday, Wang Lin also heard the news that caused a sensation. At first, he thought it was just a gimmick made by some unscrupulous profiteer to please the public. But after thinking about it carefully, Wang Lin faintly felt that Golden Hall had some unusual means. An unknown shop was actually able to cause the entire city to know about a single news in a short day, causing a huge commotion. This in itself was not normal. In Wang Lin's view, even if the so-called peerless saber was just a gimmick, this kind of hype could not be done by ordinary businessmen at all. Therefore, Wang Lin couldn't help but come to find out. At noon today, Golden Hall would reveal the true face of the peerless saber. Wang Lin would like to see who the owner of Golden Hall was and whether the peerless saber was really as amazing as the rumors said. A magnificent chariot pulled by 4 golden-maned white deer drove through the street and suddenly stopped beside Wang Lin. The curtain of the chariot was pulled up, revealing a kindly middle-aged face. He said with a smile, "Isn't this Brother Wang Lin of Keystone Business?" Wang Lin cupped his hands and said indifferently, "Shopkeeper Xiao of Treasure Loft." The kindly middle-aged man was Xiao Yuanzhong. He was the boss of Treasure Loft, a first-class business in Donglin Town. He was shrewd and experienced. However, Treasure Loft and Keystone Business were competitors, so Wang Lin didn't like Xiao Yuanzhong very much. "Haha, Brother Wang Lin, are you also going to Golden Hall to have a look?" Xiao Yuanzhong said with a smile. "Yes." Wang Lin nodded calmly. "Golden Hall made such a big noise yesterday. Even I can't help but be curious." Xiao Yuanzhong agreed and said, "That's right. I heard that Golden Hall just popped up a few months ago. I thought it was just a small shop. Who would have thought that the boss of Golden Hall is not simple?" Speaking of this, Xiao Yuanzhong said meaningfully, "Now all the peers in Donglin Town have been alarmed. Brother Wang Lin should be clear that one more strong competitor is equal to one more hungry wolf. In this case, I wonder what Miss Wansu thinks about it." Wang Lin shook his head and said, "I can't guess Miss Wansu's thoughts." "Oh," Xiao Yuanzhong said and nodded. He didn't say anything else and left with a smile. It seems that the noise made by Golden Hall has aroused the vigilance of other businesses. It will not be easy for Golden Hall to gain a foothold in the future. Wang Lin pondered. Today, the 800 Avenue was particularly lively. Not only ordinary people, but also a large number of practitioners were rushing to the place where Golden Hall was located. What Wang Lin heard along the way was all about the peerless saber of Golden Hall. Not all of them believed the rumor was true, and there were some voices of doubt. But the more they did so, the more curious he became. Along the way, in addition to Xiao Yuanzhong of Treasure Loft, Wang Lin also met many big shots of other businesses, all of whom were well-known and powerful figures in Donglin Town. Wu Yongtai of Wu Business and Shi Wenfeng, the owner of Gold Collector, seemed to be the bosses of businesses, but they were supported by powerful clans. In addition to these people, Wang Lin also saw many figures of Gang Spirit Realm practitioners, some of whom were even ranked in Donglin Town, such as Lei Qidong, the senior instructor of Donglin Academy, and Sun Zhan, the chief instructor of Purple Gold Martial Club. All these made Wang Lin sigh inwardly that the boss of Golden Hall was really great. A piece of news with a lot of gimmicks could attract so much attention. It could be seen that the boss must be an expert in commercial hype. However, Wang Lin also knew that if the so-called peerless saber of Golden Hall didn't live up to its name, the consequences would not be good. Business was based on credibility. Under the watchful eyes of so many people, if Golden Hall dared to deceive the public, it would never have a foothold on the 800th Street. Before long, Wang Lin came to the front of Golden Hall. This place had long been blocked. 3 floors inside and 3 floors outside were full of figures, and all kinds of noises came one after another. Peerless saber? What level of spiritual weapon is it? Is it human level, earth level, or heaven level? It can't be a pure yang spiritual weapon. It's a supreme treasure that can only be used by strong practitioners of reincarnation developing realm. I don't think this peerless saber is divided according to its level. The reason why it's called peerless saber may be that it has a very unique function and power. Don't talk too early. Golden Hall is not a big shop, but it talks big. I think this peerless saber is a fraud. How is it possible? No business dares to joke about this kind of thing. If it's fake, it will offend everyone here, and Golden Hall can't bear the consequences. Standing at the periphery of the crowd and listening to these discussions, Wang Lin became more and more curious. How would the shopkeeper of Golden Hall face this situation? Would Golden Hall become famous today and gain a foothold in Donglin Town? Or would it leave in a mess after a farce? At the same time, Lin Sun also left home. Passing through winding and dark alleys, he walked out of the chaotic and turbulent civilian area. Today, he was going to buy some ordinary weapons and spiritual ink to pave the way for the next refining. The profits from refining weapons were extremely high, and through refining weapons, he could also hone his spiritual tattoos, which was very good for Lin Sun to become a real spiritual tattooist in the future. It was killing two birds with one stone. As far as Lin Sun knew, some spiritual tattooists in the world would more or less choose to rely on a certain big force in order to refine spiritual weapons for these forces. While gaining wealth, they could also achieve the purpose of honing their spiritual tattoos. Along the way, Lin Sun also heard some news about the peerless saber that Golden Hall was about to sell today, which made him a little confused. He was very clear that Golden Hall was like an empty shell now, short of financial resources and shallow foundation. How could it have a peerless saber for sale? Lin Sun was puzzled. Although he sold an explosive flame saber to Golden Hall yesterday, it was just a low-grade spiritual weapon of human rank, the most common kind of spiritual weapons. It couldn't be associated with a peerless saber at all. Lin Sun shook his head. He was not interested in wasting time on such a thing. What was more, even if Golden Hall really had a peerless saber for sale, Lin Sun could not afford it with his current financial resources. Soon, Lin Sun walked into a street corner shop specializing in selling ordinary weapons. At the same time, in Golden Hall, Gu Yang was restless, not because of fear, but because of excitement. The street outside the shop was already crowded with people, and the noise constantly rushed into the shop, making Gu Yang's blood boil. He clenched his fists tightly. Whether Golden Hall could make a name for itself depended on today. Is this scene worth being excited about? Gu Yinping came out of the inner room with a delicate jade box in his arms. Seeing his son's appearance, he couldn't help but shake his head. Gu Yang scratched his head, feeling a little embarrassed. When you experience more things in the future, you will not be so embarrassed. As the saying goes, calm in every big event is a character that a qualified commercial practitioner must have. Gu Yinping's expression was tranquil. On his ordinary face, there was a calm and unruffled aura. Commercial practitioner. It was a title of a practitioner who entered the Tao through commerce and fought for the road of cultivation with wealth. This title was full of the stink of money and would often be despised and spurned by real practitioners. But in the young Gu Yang's mind, commercial practitioner was the most sacred road. His father was a commercial practitioner who was also the person he admired most. Even in Gu Yang's mind, there was only one person in the whole empire who could be compared with his father, and that person was the most famous owner of Keystone business in the whole world. Fortune God sure. Let's go. Don't let our guests wait too long. Gu Yinping turned and walked out of the shop. Gu Yang hurriedly followed him. He came out. Is that the boss of Golden Hall? I thought he had 3 heads and 6 arms, but it turns out that he is just a mediocre middle-aged man. Look at the jade box in his hand. Is the peerless saber hidden in it? When they saw Gu Yinping and his son coming out and standing on the high steps in front of the door of Golden Hall, the crowd who had been waiting outside for a long time immediately became excited and clamorous. Wang Lin also narrowed his eyes and carefully sized up Gu Yinping. However, he discovered that Gu Yinping's face was too unfamiliar to him, and he didn't recognize who Gu Yinping was. But judging from his leisurely manner, he was indeed not an ordinary person. Wang Lin could not help but look forward to it. Did the boss of Golden Hall really have a peerless saber? Not only Wang Lin, but also Xiao Yuanzhong and other bigwigs from the major businesses in Donglin Town were also secretly looking at all this at the moment. Gu Yinping waved his hand, and the lively atmosphere immediately calmed down. Without any opening remarks, Gu Yinping seemed to be straightforward and efficient. He directly opened the jade box and withdrew a spirit saber that was completely suffused with strands of a crimson sheen. The saber was 3 feet and 4 inches long and about 3 fingers wide. Its blade was curved like a swallow's wing, shining dazzlingly in the sunlight. Swish! The gazes of everyone converged onto the blade in unison. However, when they saw the appearance of the blade clearly and the aura it emanated, the atmosphere and the surroundings instantly became deathly silent, while a wisp of surprise and bewilderment appeared. The expressions of many had become strange, astounded, and they seemed to not dare believe their eyes. At this moment, before Gu Yinping introduced it, someone had already shouted angrily, "What a profiteer! Is this the F*King Peerless Saber you said? It is obviously the most common explosive flame saber." Chapter 74. That voice was furious and extremely loud. As soon as it was spoken, it completely destroyed the silence in the surroundings, and many people started cursing along with it. What the hell? An explosive flame saber? Do you think we're all fools? Get out of Donglin Town. You've gone too far. Golden Hall is definitely an unscrupulous business. How dare you fool people with a low-level spiritual weapon? Get out of Donglin Town. We don't welcome profiteers like Golden Hall. Get out of Donglin Town. Many ordinary people who didn't know the situation also shouted. It was no wonder that they were disappointed. They had thought that the peerless saber was magical, but it turned out to be an explosive flame saber that was very common in the market. It was more than deceiving them. They were played like monkeys. Even the bosses of major businesses who came to investigate were surprised at the moment. The boss of Golden Hall didn't look stupid. Why would he do such a stupid thing as digging his own grave? However, these bigwigs were all very shrewd. They faintly sensed that things might not be so simple, so they didn't get angry and kept a cold attitude. If Golden Hall left Donglin Town with their tails between their legs, they would have one less competitor. But what if they didn't? They'd better not express their opinions before the final conclusion was made. Wang Lin was also among them. But different from other bigwigs, he was stunned at the first sight of the explosive flame saber. It wasn't that this saber was too magical, but that he had personally identified it yesterday. This was the explosive flame saber that Lin Sun sent to Keystone Business for sale. Wang Lin couldn't remember it wrong. At that time, he realized that this saber was indeed an explosive flame saber, but there was a trace of unique spirit in the saber, which made it extraordinary. Unfortunately, before Wang Lin could carefully examine it, he received Mu Wansu's order to keep Lin Sun and his saber out of the door. At that time, Wang Lin was a little unwilling, but Mu Wansu was so determined that he had no choice but to give up. Who would have thought that the explosive flame saber would appear in Golden Hall only 1 day later? What's more, the boss of Golden Hall took it as a peerless saber to hype it up. Thinking of this, Wang Lin felt a little aggrieved. Now he could be sure that the boss of Golden Hall was definitely not an ordinary person, nor was he an unscrupulous profiteer in the public's words, based on the previous extremely shrewd means of hype. Since he dared to take out this saber in public, it must be because this saber was different from other explosive flame sabers and had an extremely unique function. What was the use of it? While Wang Lin felt wronged, he became even more curious. Curses rose and fell in the surroundings, and all sorts of filthy words flowed out endlessly. The scene was chaotic to the point it faintly showed signs of losing control. Standing on the high steps, Gu Liang had never experienced such a situation before. He was so angry that his face flushed red, angry and wronged. These short-sighted fellows didn't even know the specifics, yet they were already cursing. This was simply too much. Gu Liang was just about to refute when he was stopped by his father, Gu Yinping. At this time, Gu Yinping's expression was still calm and tranquil, as if he had not been affected at all. However, his eyes were sharp and bright, glancing at the audience like a knife. He said in a deep voice, whether it's true or not, and whether it deserves the title of Peerless Saber, we only need to identify it. He looked mediocre, but when he opened his mouth, his voice reverberated like thunder, immediately suppressing the curses on the scene. Many ordinary people only felt a buzzing in their ears, a surge of chi and blood, and their faces suddenly changed. The atmosphere also became quiet. What a strong spiritual power this guy had. Obviously, he was a strong practitioner in gang spirit realm. Many practitioners present couldn't help but be surprised and felt that Gu Yinping was extraordinary. It was rare for a shop owner to have such ability in cultivation. His words shocked the scene, and Gu Yang couldn't help but feel admiration for him. "My friend, how are you going to identify it?" Someone asked in a deep voice. This was a practitioner with looming gang chi around him. Obviously, he was also a powerful figure. Gu Yinping smiled slightly and said with great confidence, "It's very simple. This Gu knows that there are quite a few people of the same profession present here. I only need to invite them over and have them tell everyone the truth. I believe that in this way, everyone will no longer doubt this Gu's intentions." Many people couldn't help nodding. This method was really good. At the same time, there were also many people looking at different places where the bosses of major business stood, such as Xiao Yuanzhong and Wang Lin, etc. Wang Lin took the lead to say, "In that case, it's better to accept than to decline." He stood out. Suddenly, many people present recognized Wang Lin, who was a well-known treasure appraiser in Keystone business. It was fair for him to come forward to identify the explosive flame saber. "I'd like to have a look and see what's so wonderful about this peerless saber." An amiable, fat, middle-aged man came out. Xiao Yuanzhong, the shopkeeper of Treasure Loft. Seeing that he also stood out, the crowd became restless again. How can we, Wu Business, be excluded from such a thing? Haha, I, Gold Collector, would also like to have a look and tell you the truth. Then, several people came out one after another, all of whom were well-known figures in the major business firms of Donglin Town. Seeing such a scene, the people present were completely relieved, but they still had some doubts in their hearts. Was there really any amazing secret hidden in this ordinary explosive flame saber? Please wait here for a moment. My peers will reveal the answer to you later. Gu Yinping cupped his hands to the crowd, then turned around and walked into Golden Hall with Wang Lin, Xiao Yuanzhong, and others. Looking at Gu Yinping's back leading the way, except for Wang Lin, Xiao Yuanzhong, and others sneered in their hearts. Gu Yinping wanted to solve the current crisis with their help? Impossible. As the representatives of the major business firms of Donglin Town, Xiao Yuanzhong and others certainly didn't want to see another competitor, which was quite natural. They had made up their minds that if the result was not satisfactory after the appraisal of the saber, they would never mind taking the opportunity to stab Golden Hall and make it disappear from Donglin Town completely. Outside Golden Hall, it was still crowded, and everyone was waiting for a result. Standing in front of Golden Hall, Gu Yang's heart was pounding. He vaguely felt that it was inappropriate for his father to do so. His peers in Donglin Town were eager to see Golden Hall make a fool of themselves. How could they help him? But out of respect and confidence for his father, Gu Yang didn't panic because of this. As time went by, there was no movement in Golden Hall, which made the crowd around impatient. Why did it take so long to appraise an explosive flame saber? When the crowd became more and more impatient, there was finally some movement in Golden Hall. The first one to come out was Xiao Yuanzhong, the boss of Treasure Loft. But at this moment, he was in a trance with his eyebrows tightly knitted. His usually kind face was faintly covered with a touch of surprise and solemnity. After coming out, Xiao Yuanzhong squeezed through the crowd with his guards and hurried away in his chariot without saying a word. This scene shocked everyone present. What on earth happened in Golden Hall just now? Not long after, 5 or 6 people, including the shopkeeper of Gold Collector and the shopkeeper of Wu Business, also came out one after another. Each of them looked gloomy, doubtful, or thoughtful. like Xiao Yu and Zhong. They turned around and left without saying a word as soon as they walked out of Golden Hall. Seeing this, many clever people in the field had vaguely guessed something, but they couldn't be sure. Most people became a little confused. What was the result of the appraisal? At this time, they saw Gu Yanping and Wang Lin walking out side by side. The former looked relaxed and talked cheerfully, while the latter shook his head and sighed from time to time. I didn't expect that it was shopkeeper Gu who had sharp eyes and got a great treasure in the end. Wang Lin said with a little regret. Thank you for your praise. I don't deserve it. Gu Yanping smiled and cupped his hands. Alas, Wang Lin sighed again. When he was about to turn around and leave, he heard a voice in the crowd. Taoism, Peer Wang Lin. What's the result of the appraisal? As soon as the words came out, many people looked in the direction of the voice. Seeing this, Wang Lin was silent for a long time and then said, It deserves the word peerless. Then he turned around and left. As soon as this comment came out, all the people present were shocked and burst into an uproar. That ordinary explosive flame saber could really be called peerless? Looking at the shock and confusion on the people's faces, Gu Yang couldn't help laughing. The anger and grievances in his heart were swept away, and he was very happy. Gu Yanping's expression was still as calm and indifferent as before. This kind of calmness was also rare. Clang! A sound of saber rang through the whole field. Gu Yanping took out the explosive flame saber, and the blade surged with the flame like the tide, gorgeous and dazzling. All of a sudden, all the people present were attracted to it. It seemed that they wanted to see what mystery this saber had and why it deserved the word peerless. It's hard to explain the mystery of this saber in a few words, but I can tell you that the power of this saber is 20% stronger than that of other explosive flame sabers, which can be compared with a middle-grade spiritual weapon of human rank. Gu Yanping said slowly with a confident look on his face. 20% stronger. Only a few words shocked many practitioners present. They were all experts, so they naturally knew what it meant for a common low-grade spiritual weapon of human rank to have 20% more power. The most important thing was that this saber was still a low-grade spiritual weapon of human rank, but it already had the power comparable to a middle-grade spiritual weapon of human rank. This was really rare. Especially this explosive flame saber was an extremely common spiritual weapon, but it could produce such a unique power, which could indeed be called peerless. At least in the whole empire, there might not be a similar spiritual weapon. What made people even more curious was who refined such a rare spirit saber. Ordinary spiritual tattooists couldn't do this at all. A spiritual tattoo master might be able to refine a variety of high-grade spiritual weapons, but it would be very difficult for him to create a new power in the most common low-grade spiritual weapon of human rank. Could it be that this spiritual saber was made by a spiritual tattoo master? Perhaps only such a transcendent being could create a completely different kind of explosive flame saber in an ingenious way. Many people thought to themselves, but unfortunately, they probably didn't know that the owner who refined this explosive flame saber was just a little-known spiritual apprentice, not even a spiritual tattooist. Chapter 75. At 1:15 the storm caused by the peerless saber came to an end in front of Golden Hall. After confirming the extraordinariness of the explosive flame saber, many people started bidding on the spot. In the end, someone even offered 800 imperial silver coins for the saber, but it was finally bought by a practitioner in Gang Spirit Realm at the price of 300 imperial silver coins. The price of 300 imperial silver coins was outrageous, especially for a low-grade spiritual weapon of human rank, which was even more incredible. After all, the price of such a spiritual weapon in the market was generally between 30 imperial silver coins to 80 imperial silver coins, so 300 imperial silver coins were enough to buy a high-grade spiritual weapon of human rank. But those who knew the secret of this saber knew that the 300 imperial silver coins were not wasted, because it was so unique that there was no second one like it in the whole empire so far. The rarer something was, the more precious it was. When an ordinary spiritual weapon suddenly had a unique property, it was no longer ordinary. For Gu Yanping, the price of 800 imperial silver coins was too high. Anyway, The explosive flame saber was just an ordinary spiritual weapon, so 300 imperial silver coins were enough for him. His action won the praise and favor of many people present, and even improved the reputation of Golden Hall. It could be said that after today's event, Golden Hall had completely opened up the market in Donglin Town. But if it really wanted to stand firm, it still needed to operate step by step. And all this was thanks to his saber. Sitting in the inner chamber of Golden Hall, Gu Yinping unconsciously thought of Lin Sun again, thinking that Keystone Business really made a mistake this time and let him pick up a good treasure to reverse the situation. "Father, I have contacted the supplier, and they have signed a cooperation contract with us." Gu Yang walked in and said happily. Gu Yinping nodded absent-mindedly and said, "Liang, although we've opened up our business now, trouble will follow. The others in the city won't let us do business just like that." Gu Yang frowned, and the joy on his face faded a lot. "Father, in your opinion, what should we do next?" Gu Yinping muttered, "Do you remember the child who sold explosive flame saber yesterday?" Gu Yang answered without hesitation, "Of course." Gu Yinping took a deep breath and said, "Your next task is to find this child and invite him to Golden Hall for a talk." Gu Yang's heart jolted as he vaguely understood his father's thoughts. He nodded and said, "Father, don't worry. That young master is our savior. I will definitely complete this matter perfectly." Gu Yinping nodded. He suddenly sighed and said, "A single treasure can only bring popularity for a short period of time. If you want this to continue for a long time, you must have more treasures. Only then can you compete with others in the same trade. However, this is easier said than done." Although the matter had come to an end, the news about what happened in front of Golden Hall had just begun to ferment. In just a few hours, the entire Donglin town knew that the peerless saber Golden Hall sold today was an explosive flame saber. However, such an ordinary explosive flame saber had rendered the representatives of the Treasure Loft, the Gold Collector, the Wu Group, and the other top firms speechless and frustrated. The same explosive flame saber caused many practitioners to compete for it, and it was finally sold at an amazing price of 300 imperial silver coins. Golden Hall was on fire. From yesterday to today, in just one night, Golden Hall's reputation had spread throughout Donglin Town, causing numerous discussions and uproars. The discussion about the uniqueness of the explosive flame saber was even more vociferous. Many practitioners who knew the truth were full of praise for it and gave this unique explosive flame saber a new name, Flaming Spirit Saber. As for the major businesses in Donglin Town, they were more concerned about which spiritual tattooist made this Flaming Spirit Saber, and whether the spiritual tattooist was working in Golden Hall now. If they could find out all this, they would know the details of Golden Hall, and then they could take some precautions or suppression measures against Golden Hall. Even they could spend a lot of money to invite the mysterious spiritual tattooist to work in their own businesses and poach Golden Hall's talent. In the afternoon of the same day, these businesses all sent their spies to inquire about the mysterious spiritual tattooist who made the Flaming Spirit Saber. Although it seemed to be done secretly, it still attracted a lot of attention. For a while, the discussion about the mysterious spiritual tattooist became a hot topic in Donglin Town. As the initiator, Lin Sun didn't know all this at all. He had just bought more than 10 kinds of finished spiritual inks and more than 10 ordinary weapons. Although he had bargained with the shop owner again and again, he finally paid 120 imperial silver coins for them. When Lin Sun walked out of the shop, there were only 9 silver coins left. The speed of spending money, like running water, made Lin Sun feel a little heartache. "I hope the treasures made of these things can be sold at a good price." Lin Sun exhaled a long breath and walked along the street to the civilian area. When he passed by a busy tea house, Lin Sun happened to hear something about what happened in front of Golden Hall today. When he heard that the so-called peerless saber was just an explosive flame saber, his face couldn't help but become slightly weird. He vaguely remembered that when he sold explosive flame sabers in Golden Hall yesterday, he didn't see another one. Could it be? Lin Sun was in a trance. 300 imperial silver coins. Lin Sun didn't calm down until he got home. Even if the explosive flame saber was made by him, so what? He had sold it to Golden Hall yesterday, so no matter how high the price was, it had nothing to do with him. You came back just in time. This is the information sent by Fatty Jiao. Xia Ji walked out of the house and handed Lin Sun a scroll made of animal skin. Immediately, Xia Ji took out an animal skin bag, which made a beautiful sound of coins colliding with each other, which made Lin Sun's eyes move to it once. These are the spoils, 200 imperial silver coins in total, Xia Ji said casually. Lin Sun felt a little confused. He pointed to the animal skin scroll in his hand and the animal skin bag containing the imperial silver coins and asked, "Where did these come from?" Xia Ji thought for a while and suddenly realized that although she said those words to Lin Sun last night, Lin Sun was cultivating at that time and didn't hear it. So Xia Ji explained again. Lin Sun's lips couldn't help twitching. He didn't expect that Xia Ji not only killed a gang boss last night, but also recruited a group of underlings. Not only did she get a lot of spoils, but she also sent Fatty Jiao to help him collect information about the clan of Wu. After a long time, Lin Sun digested the information and said, "Be careful in the future." Xia Ji nodded and said, "I'm hungry. I'm going to cook." Lin Sun turned around and walked to the kitchen, but he felt a little complicated. Xia Ji's performance was beyond his imagination again, and he didn't know what to say for a while. Looking at Lin Sun's busy figure in the kitchen, Xia Ji couldn't help but show a faint smile on her lips, which soon disappeared. She turned around and returned to her room, muttering another name in her heart, Green Wolf. This was a nickname that belonged to a gang boss in another part of the civilian district. After dinner, Xia Ji left again. Lin Sun didn't stop her. He had changed his attitude towards Xia Ji and no longer treated her as a child. Sitting in front of the desk, Lin Sun opened the animal skin scroll, on which all the information about the clan of Wu was clearly listed. In Donglin Town, there were 3 local forces, namely, the clan of Wu, the clan of Xiao, and the clan of Jin. Wu Business, Treasure Loft, and Gold Collector, which were controlled by them, were one of the most powerful businesses in the whole Donglin Town, sharing nearly half of the commercial profits in the town. According to the information, the clan of Wu had hundreds of direct clansmen, thousands of guards, vast fields of spiritual land, and more than a dozen mines. What's more, they firmly controlled the trade of spiritual grains. Almost all the merchants who transported spiritual grains in the town got their goods from Wu Business. In addition, there were 3 overmatches in the gang spirit realm in the clan of Wu. Perhaps the overmatches in the gang spirit realm were not so outstanding in the whole Xiao Empire, but in a city on the border of Southwest Province, they could be regarded as the top bigwigs who could call the wind and summon the rain. The current patriarch of the clan of Wu was Wu Chaochuan, an overmatch in the 9th level of martial realm, who was shrewd and astute. He was a very powerful figure. The first elder of the clan of Wu was Wu Yunshan, an overmatch in the middle stage of gang spirit realm. The second elder was Wu Yushan, an overmatch in the early stage of gang spirit realm. The third elder was Wu Lanshan, an overmatch in the early stage of gang spirit realm. Soon, Lin Sun had a basic grasp of the forces and resources of the clan of Wu, which made him a little surprised. He didn't expect that the clan of Wu had such a large force. It was indeed an overlord in Donglin Town. In addition to these, there was some information about Lin Fei in the animal skin scroll, but most of it was useless to Lin Sun. The clan of Wu, Lin Fei, Lin Sun was lost in thought. After thinking for a long time, the only thing Lin Sun could judge was that his existence was far from threatening the clan of Wu. In addition, the clan of Wu was afraid of the power of Keystone Business, so they could only deal with him in the dark when dealing with him, and the power they could use was limited. This judgment was very important, so that Lin Sun wouldn't be confused, and he would have enough time and opportunity to prepare countermeasures. But Lin Sun also knew that he would be in danger when the clan of Wu knew that Mu Wansu had completely separated herself from him. It seems that I have to hurry up. Lin Sun took a deep breath. The bright candlelight shone on his handsome and angular face, outlining a touch of firmness. Chapter 76. At the same night, in Keystone Business, Mu Wansu had just returned from a banquet jointly organized by the bosses of major business firms. Only the heads of the top business forces in Donglin town could participate in it. Mu Wansu had thought that something big had happened. Unexpectedly, the most discussed topic in the whole banquet was Golden Hall. In the past 2 days, this previously unknown trading firm had become the talk of the town. Especially today, because of the explosive flame saber, the heads of the trading firms could not keep calm and gathered together to discuss countermeasures. Donglin town was not large, and its territory had been divided up. Now Golden Hall wanted to snatch food from the tiger's mouth, which was intolerable to other business firms. Regrettably, no unified strategy was formed at this banquet. Thinking about it, these trading companies all had their own plans. Without enough benefits, how could they stand on the same front? Most importantly, the emergence of Golden Hall was too abrupt. In just 2 days, it made such a big movement that other businesses had no time to prepare for it. It was obviously too late to stop its rise. Mu Wansu was not interested in suppressing Golden Hall. She knew very well that in the eyes of the 3 local forces, Wu Business, Treasure Loft, and Gold Collector, Keystone Business behind her could only be regarded as an outsider, and there was an extremely cruel competition between them. Therefore, Mu Wansu was not in the mood to get involved in this kind of thing. When she returned to Keystone Business and arrived at her residence, Mu Wansu couldn't help but be surprised to see a person already waiting there. Wang Lin, what happened? Mu Wansu asked. That person was Wang Lin. Seeing Mu Wansu, he couldn't help but look a little complicated. He said, Miss Wansu, have you heard what happened in front of Golden Hall today? Why was it Golden Hall again? Mu Wansu frowned and said absent-mindedly, Yes, I have. What's wrong? Wang Lin took a deep breath and tentatively asked, Do you know the origin of the flaming spirit saber that night? Mu Wansu immediately showed a look of interest. She invited Wang Lin into her room and took a seat. Then she said, Do you already know the owner of this spiritual weapon? After what happened at the banquet tonight, Mu Wansu couldn't help but wonder who the spiritual tattooist who could refine such a unique, explosive flame saber was. Because of the increase in power, this saber was even named Flaming Spirit Saber, which was a great honor for a spiritual tattooist. Like other business heads, Mu Wansu was also calculating in her mind that if she could find this mysterious spiritual tattooist, she must use all means to draw him into Keystone Business. Wang Lin shook his head. I don't know who made the Flaming Spirit Saber, but I know who sold it to Golden Hall. Mu Wansu's spirits rose, and her clear eyes lit up. Oh, tell me about it. Seeing this, Wang Lin hesitated for a moment and whispered, Miss Wansu, do you still remember Lin Sun's visit yesterday? Mu Wansu was displeased. Why are you mentioning that brat at this time? Could it be? Suddenly, she seemed to realize something, and her beautiful face suddenly changed. She cried out involuntarily, Are you talking about Lin Sun, the little bastard? Wang Lin nodded bitterly. Seeing this, Mu Wansu's original excitement suddenly disappeared, and her beautiful face was gloomy. After a long time, she said, You mean the spiritual weapon he came to Keystone Business to sell yesterday is the Flaming Spirit Saber that caused a sensation in the whole city? Although Wang Lin saw that Mu Wansu's mood was not right, he finally nodded, Yes, I personally identified this saber yesterday and confirmed it in Golden Hall today. There is no mistake. It is the saber that Lin Sun brought yesterday. Bang! The teacup in Mu Wansu's hand was crushed, and her plump and attractive chest rose and fell violently. It could be seen how emotional she was at this moment. Indeed, she did not expect such a coincidence. Yesterday, she had just proudly expelled a little bastard whom she had hated for a long time and completely drew a line with him. Then today, she learned that the little bastard was the one behind the scenes who helped Golden Hall to become popular overnight. The most terrible thing was that if she hadn't made the decision yesterday, the unique Flaming Spirit Saber would have belonged to Keystone Business. Why didn't you say earlier? Mu Wansu was a little unhappy and looked at Wang Lin coldly. Wang Lin smiled bitterly. I had agreed with Lin Sun yesterday, but Miss Wansu was so determined, I could only... Mu Wansu said angrily, You didn't say that the flaming spirit saber was very powerful yesterday. Wang Lin felt wronged by being reprimanded and argued. I told you yesterday. At that time, you said that it was just an explosive flame saber. No matter how unique it was nothing. Mu Wansu was stunned, and then suddenly remembered that she seemed to have said such words yesterday. She couldn't help but feel aggrieved. She didn't care about the flaming spirit saber. What she cared about was which spiritual tattooist made this flaming spirit saber. If a spiritual tattooist who could refine such a spiritual weapon could be invited to Keystone Business, it would definitely bring immeasurable benefits to Keystone Business in the future. Obviously, since Lin Sun had this saber, he must know the origin of this saber. But unfortunately, Mu Wansu ruined all of this with her own hands. Thinking of this, Mu Wansu couldn't help but feel regretful. If she had known this earlier, she wouldn't have fallen out with that guy yesterday. This bastard is simply too infuriating. Mu Wansu cursed in her heart. She finally realized that every time she encountered this kid, she would indeed suffer misfortune. Just like yesterday, she originally thought that she had vented her resentment, but who would have imagined that retribution would come back to her today? Could it be that this little brat was his nemesis? Mu Wansu felt her head swell. She had a belly full of rage that had nowhere to vent, and it caused her gorgeous and beautiful face to carry a wisp of resentment. Seeing this, Wang Lin couldn't help saying, "Miss Wansu, this is actually a good thing. In Donglin Town, perhaps only Golden Hall, and we know that the flaming spirit saber is from Lin Sun. This is our advantage. As long as we find Child Lin, we can definitely find out the mysterious spiritual tattooist who made the flaming spirit saber. If we can invite this spiritual tattooist to Keystone Business as soon as possible, it will be a great blessing." Mu Wansu hesitated. "You mean you want me to bury the hatchet with that guy?" Wang Lin was stunned and said, "Miss Wansu, do you have any deep hatred with Child Lin's son?" "No." Mu Wansu shook her head. Indeed, there was no deep hatred. It was just personal grievances. Wang Lin smiled. "In this case, I will meet Child Lin's son on your behalf tomorrow. I believe that as long as we show enough sincerity, he should not care about this matter anymore." Thinking that she had to lower her head to Lin's son, Mu Wansu's anger rose. She raised her eyebrows and waved her hand resolutely. "No need." Wang Lin was stunned. Mu Wansu said coldly, "Lin Sun is only at the 5th level of martial realm, and he has just come out from the remote Feiyun village. How can he make friends with the mysterious spiritual tattooist with his identity? In my opinion, the flaming spirit saber may just be obtained by chance. It is not worth the effort to get him." Wang Lin couldn't help saying, "But what if?" Mu Wansu said, "Even if this guy really has something to do with the mysterious spiritual tattooist, it is not too late to deal with this matter later. Our top priority is to wait and see what role Lin Sun plays in this matter." Speaking of this, Mu Wansu had regained her confidence. "Do you want me to lower my head?" "Impossible." Wang Lin sighed in his heart, feeling a little dispirited. He said no more and got up to leave. "Since I want to keep an eye on Lin Sun's movements from tomorrow, find out who he contacts every day. Maybe we can find some clues about the mysterious spiritual tattooist," Mu Wansu ordered. Wang Lin nodded and turned to leave. Everything they talked about was about the mysterious spiritual tattooist, but they would never think that the mysterious spiritual tattooist was Lin Sun. In fact, it was reasonable. Lin Sun was only at the 5th level of martial realm. How could he refine a spiritual weapon? In the history of Xiao Empire, there were indeed spiritual tattooists in martial realm who could refine spiritual weapons. But those people were so rare that one might not appear in hundreds of years. Was it possible that Lin Sun was such a rare spiritual tattooist? Neither Mu Wansu nor Wang Lin would believe it. What was more, the flaming spirit saber was so unique that it could increase the power of an ordinary low-grade spiritual weapon of human rank by 20%. How could a teenager in martial realm do it? Even ordinary spiritual tattooists couldn't do it. So subconsciously, not only Mu Wansu and Wang Lin, but also Gu Yinping of Golden Hall regarded the mysterious spiritual tattooist and Lin Sun as two different people. Wang Lin left, but Mu Wansu felt inexplicably agitated. Lin Sun's figure flashed in her mind from time to time like a haunting ghost. Mu Wansu bit her plump and moist red lips. Her beautiful face kept changing in the light. Sometimes she gnashed her teeth, sometimes she frowned and worried, and sometimes she was in a trance. This little bastard must be sent by God to torture me. Finally, Mu Wansu let out a faint sigh. In the night, Lin Sun refined a flaming spirit saber again and succeeded in one try. But compared with the previous 2 times, he was not so surprised. The only thing that satisfied him was that after lighting up the second spiritual star in his sea of consciousness last night, his perceptive power had obviously improved to a higher level. It was sharp and tough, and it became more and more convenient for him to inscribe spiritual tattoos. Before long, Xia Ji also came back from the night. Seeing Lin Sun sitting on the bed and meditating, she didn't disturb him. She boiled some hot water, washed up, and lay on the bed. Looking at Lin Sun's angular profile, she was lost in thought. Xia Ji also read the information about Clan of Wu sent by Fatty Jiao. She knew it was a little tricky for Lin Sun, so she decided to do something. But at this moment, Lin Sun suddenly opened his eyes and said, "I don't object to you fighting in this area, but I have a plan about Clan of Wu, so I can't allow you to take risks." His expression was extremely serious, even a little grim. Xia Ji opened her dark crescent eyes wide and stared at Lin Sun for a long time. Then she gently nodded and closed her eyes. But she felt a little strange in her heart. He actually knows what I'm thinking? Chapter 77. In the early morning, heavy snow suddenly fell from the sky, and a string of arm-thick icicles hung under the eaves, making people feel cold. Swish, swish, swish. Saber light flew in the courtyard, rolling up thousands of snow waves. Lin Sun's upper body was naked, and his figure was dreamy and illusory. He waved the sky breacher so hard that not even a drop of water could enter. His figure became thin and slender, and the muscles on his naked upper body were like well-tempered lead blocks. He didn't look strong, but had a sense of well-proportioned and harmonious beauty. It had been more than half a year since he left the mine prison. Lin Sun had changed from a thin and pale boy to a dignified and calm man. His originally delicate and chiseled face had an additional radiance to it. Whoosh! Suddenly, a white bone spear sprang out and rushed into the saber shadows. Simple, direct, and neat, it hit the flaws of the saber shadows. With a bang, Lin Sun staggered and stepped back a few steps, and the sky breacher in his hand buzzed. This saber play is very powerful, but you haven't learned it well, so you can't exert its essence. Xia Ji stood on the snow in the distance, wearing a black windbreaker and holding a bone spear about 3 meters long. Her white face was peaceful. "I know." Lin Sun put away the saber, exhaled lightly, and began to wash. What he had just practiced was the 6-word saber play, but he had only reached the imperceptible level. Although he had begun to grasp the essence of the saber play, it was difficult for him to give full play to the power of the essence. Lin Sun knew that his saber play still lacked practice. It was not enough to practice it behind closed doors. He had to experience real bloody battles and fights. "You won't go out today?" Xia Ji put away the bone spear and asked. "Not for the time being." Lin Sun put on his clothes, covered his naked upper body, and began to prepare breakfast. He had refined 2 flaming spirit sabers in succession in the past 2 days, but the disturbance caused by the sale of sabers in Golden Hall made him realize that now many people in the city were looking for him, the mysterious spiritual tattooist, so it was not suitable to go to Golden Hall to sell these 2 spiritual weapons. However, Lin Sun believed that since Golden Hall could sell a flaming spirit saber for 300 imperial silver coins, they would not give up. Sooner or later, Gu Yinping would come to him. Because of the information collected by Fatty Jiao yesterday, Lin Sun thoroughly realized that his situation was not very optimistic. Whether it was to deal with the threat posed by the clan of Wu or to guard against the possible revenge from Lin Fei, Lin Sun had to do something. Last night, Lin Sun thought for a long time and finally decided to seize all available resources to enhance his strength. During breakfast, Lin Sun told his thoughts to Xia Ji. We can't sit still and wait for death. We must make some preparations and take action in advance. Summer Solstice listened quietly. Lin Sun pondered and said, this time, the clan of Wu wants to use Lin Fei to deal with me, because they are afraid that it will lead to the suppression of Keystone business. But now you know that Keystone business can no longer help us, so we can only rely on ourselves. Xia Ji raised her head and corrected him seriously. You've already said this a few days ago. Just tell me what to do. Lin Sun was stunned and embarrassed. Did I really say that? Xia Ji nodded. Lin Sun said, well, my plan is that we should take the initiative to go out and find a chance to eradicate Lin Fei and his men. Xia Ji asked, and then? Lin Sun's black eyes were surging with contemplation. The death of Lin Fei shows the attitude of the clan of Wu towards this matter. If they don't hesitate to tear off all pretenses to deal with us, we can only hide first. Xia Ji frowned. Hide? Lin Sun nodded and said, yes, I'm afraid that they have already known that we live here. It's too dangerous. After a pause, he continued, the clan of Wu is a big family with over 1,000 guards. They're the local bullies in Donglin Town. If we want to be enemies with them, we can only adopt roundabout tactics, such as assassination and sneak attack. At that time, the enemy will be in the light while we are in the dark. As long as we're not caught by them, we can absolutely make them exhausted. After thinking for a while, Lin Sun added, but this kind of tactic is very dangerous. Once we are surrounded or exposed, we can only fight desperately. Xia Ji thought for a while and said, if it's a sneak attack, I can kill a practitioner in the early stage of Gang Spirit Realm at most. Lin Sun was shocked. This was the first time that Xia Ji revealed her real fighting capacity. What surprised Lin more was that Xia Ji had the power to kill a practitioner in the early stage of Gang Spirit Realm. Gang Spirit Realm. That was the real extraordinary existence in the eyes of the world. At that step, one could refine spirit into Gang and absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth at all times. In addition, one could open up a mysterious pond of spiritual power in the ocean of Qi inside his body. His fighting capacity was so strong that practitioners in the martial realm couldn't compete with him at all. There is a saying in the world that only when one reached the Gang Spirit Realm could he be regarded as truly stepping on the road of cultivation. Not only would his strength go beyond the limits of the human body, but his life, soul, and even his whole body would undergo a new transformation. In the eyes of real practitioners, the 9th level of the martial realm was just the foundation laid for them to embark on the road of cultivation. Xia Ji said that she had the confidence to kill a practitioner in the early stage of Gang Spirit Realm. Although she had to rely on sneak attack, it was enough to shock the world. Who could believe that a 5- or 6-year-old girl had such a strong fighting capacity? After a long time, Lin Sun calmed down and said, that's even better. Xia Ji frowned and said, is that good? Give me 3 months to practice, and I can kill a practitioner in the early stage of Gang Spirit Realm face to face. Lin Sun. He had thought that he had made continuous breakthroughs in the past half a year from the 2nd level of Martial Realm at the beginning to the 5th level of Martial Realm, which could be regarded as an amazing speed. Who would have thought that Xia Ji was even more vigorous than him? This girl, he really didn't know what to say about her. Lin Sun rubbed his eyebrows and said, we don't have so much time. The worst plan I have now is that if we are really forced to the point of no return, we can leave Donglin Town first and come back later. Xia Ji raised her head and said seriously, but I don't like forbearance and escape. Lin Sun shrugged. This is the worst plan, and the chance of it happening is very small. As he spoke, a unique, rhythmic knock sounded on the door. Xia Ji seemed to know who it was and continued to eat. Soon, the door of the courtyard was pushed open, and Fatty Jiao and the Bones came in, each carrying a huge box in their hands. Greetings, Leader Shuangmu. Seeing Lin Sun was also here, Fatty Jiao and the Bones couldn't help being stunned, and then they squeezed out a flattering smile and saluted together. Lin Sun's lips twitched imperceptibly. It seemed that he couldn't refuse this ugly nickname at all. Put the things over there, and you can go." Xia Ji gave an order casually. Fatty Jiao and the bones nodded quickly, put the 2 boxes in the corner, and left respectfully. "What's this?" Lin Sun asked. Xia Ji stood up and said, "I took people to wipe out another gang last night, and this is the trophy." She opened one of the wooden chests, which was filled with shiny silver coins. There were about 500 of them. She just glanced at it and opened the other box, which contained some bottles and jars, all of which were obviously valuable. Lin Sun went forward and saw the box full of silver coins and a box full of spiritual medicine. He couldn't help saying, "Isn't the trophy too rich?" Xia Ji said lightly, "Those gangs have been operating in this civilian area for many years, often robbing, extorting, and stealing other people's property. Do you think they are short of money? These trophies are only a part of them, and most of the trophies have already been distributed to other members of Shuangmu Gang." Shuangmu Gang. Hearing this, Lin Sun couldn't help but feel helpless. So now, Shuangmu Gang has also become a gang? Xia Ji nodded, and then added, "This civilian area is a foul atmosphere, and there are all kinds of people, so the underground forces can't be eradicated at all. But under my control, Shuangmu Gang will no longer do those sneaky, murderous, and robberies." Lin Sun said in surprise, "This is equal to destroying the means they rely on for survival. Will they agree?" Xia Ji said, "They have agreed, because I took them to annex the territories of other gangs and gave them unimaginable benefits." Lin Sun was speechless and finally stopped asking. "These spiritual medicines are specially selected by my subordinates, which are of great benefit to the cultivation of the 5th level of martial realm," Xia Ji said, "and the 500 silver coins in this box can meet our daily needs. You don't have to work hard to refine spiritual weapons to make money in the future." After saying this, she turned around and went back to the room. She was going to sleep again. Lin Sun had mixed feelings. War and plunder were really one of the most effective ways to get wealth. In just 2 days, Xia Ji wiped out the 2 gangs in the civilian area and got 700 silver coins and a pile of spiritual medicines. Compared with this, the profit Lin Sun got from selling spiritual weapons was not worth mentioning. But Lin Sun would not give up refining spiritual weapons. After all, plunder and annexation were temporary and too dangerous, and the trophies he got were stained with blood. But it was different to refine spiritual weapons. It could not only bring him wealth continuously, but more importantly, he could hone his spiritual tattoos. From this day on, Lin Sun no longer went out and made full use of the daytime time to inscribe spiritual tattoos, refine spiritual weapons, refine his cultivation, sharpen his spirit, practice martial arts at the same time. Every 3 days, he would enter the battlefield of spiritual tattoos, mill waterfalls to challenge. Although he still failed every time, Lin Sun could clearly feel the progress of his physical strength. As for Xia Ji, the little girl slept during the day and disappeared at night. Every other day, she would bring back some rich trophies, either silver coins or spiritual medicines useful for Lin's cultivation. If it weren't for the trouble of the clan of Wu, Lin Sun would even like this rare, peaceful life. Unfortunately, life was not destined to be peaceful forever. On a night 10 days later, an assassination attempt against Lin Sun came quietly. Chapter 78. Late at night, the biting cold wind was whistling. In the room, Lin Sun sat cross-legged and cultivated. After 10 days of hard work and the help of various elixirs, Lin Sun's cultivation had reached the mastery of the 5th level of martial realm. The spiritual energy in his body was as pure as transparent liquid, containing terrifying power. Although the 4 spiritual power vortexes in the 4 acupoints of the heart vessel could continuously refine the quality of spiritual power, there was also a problem. After the continuous refinement, the quantity of spiritual power in the body would become relatively sparse. Therefore, if Lin Sun wanted to reach the mastery of martial realm, he needed more spiritual energy and effort than his peers. Fortunately, there were a lot of spiritual herbs that could help to refine cultivation among the spoils sent every other day, so Lin Sun didn't have to worry about this problem. I'm about to break through. Lin Sun stopped practicing and felt the change of his chi, knowing that he was only a step away from the 6th level of martial realm. In addition to diligent practice, there was another more important reason: Lin Sun's increasingly strong physique and cultivation. The so-called 9th level of martial realm was originally a process of refining the practitioner's body and nurturing spiritual energy. The refining and improvement of the body was not independent, but would feed back the cultivation inside the body. Similarly, the improvement of internal cultivation could also feed back to the physical cultivation. For example, the 5th level of martial realm, marrow cleansing, could also refine the muscles and bones, dredge the tendons and marrows through the improvement of the physical strength, so that the internal cultivation could be improved more smoothly. Similarly, the improvement of the internal cultivation would improve and develop more potential of the body, so as to remove the bottleneck of improving the strength of the body refining cultivation. All in all, the body refining was external, and the spiritual energy was internal. They were in the same body and complemented each other. Neither could be dispensed with. Some descendants of some big clans would also practice a body refining cultivation method when they cultivated their spiritual energy so as to refine the Taoist root and help the cultivation. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Although Lin Sun didn't have a body refining cultivation method, entering the spiritual tattoo battlefield, Mill waterfalls every 3 days had immeasurable benefits to the refining of his body. Naturally, all of this had a great effect on his spiritual power cultivation. Suddenly, Lin Sun was awakened. Xia Ji, who was sleeping on the bed, opened her eyes and whispered, "Someone is lurking in our courtyard." Lin Sun felt a chill in his heart. He quickly got up and hid. It was already late at night, and the area around Courtyard 49 was quiet. Only the sounds of stray dogs and cats could be heard. "How many?" Lin Sun asked in a low voice. At the same time, he spread out his perception, but found no trace of the enemy. Obviously, the enemy was either proficient in hiding or had not approached. 3. Xia Ji got up and methodically put on her clothes. She got out of bed with her long bone spear in her hand. This bone spear was very special. It was suffused with strands of faint chilly starlight in the darkness, and it seemed mysterious and murderous. Lin Sun had examined it carefully and was sure that it was a spiritual weapon, but he couldn't see the spiritual tattoo patterns on it. According to Xia Ji, this spear had been with her as long as she could remember. She didn't know its origin. When not in use, the spear would disappear in a flash according to Xia Ji's will. This made it even more mysterious. Even Lin Sun couldn't imagine that there was no spiritual weapon in the world that could have such a magical effect. It could be said to be unprecedented. They're approaching. I'll go out and have a look. Before Lin Sun could stop her, Xia Ji had pushed the door open and quietly disappeared in the darkness. Her breath completely disappeared. Lin Sun frowned and took a deep breath. Like a sensitive leopard cat, he also rushed out of the room and hid in the darkness of the courtyard. Outside the courtyard. "Hey, you too. You don't need to be so careful when dealing with a kid on the 5th level of martial realm, right?" A sloppy man with long and narrow cheeks said with a frivolous smile. "Du Shirao, why don't you act alone?" In the darkness of the alley, a woman in a tight black leather skirt stood. Her snow-white, plump, and slender legs were straight and attractive. Above her slender waist and abdomen were plump breasts that almost exploded. Her plump red lips were bright in the dark. Beside the woman stood an old man with a sad face. He looked at the sky from time to time with his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't look amazing. The man called Du Shirao grinned and said, "I'm not interested in kids. I only like coquettish women like you." He licked his lips with a touch of hot greed in his eyes. "Really? Do you want to play with me now?" The woman smiled coquettishly and deliberately stuck out her plump, snow-white breasts, but her eyes looked cold. "Well, I don't want to die. Who doesn't know that as long as I sleep with you, Black Widow, I won't live to see tomorrow's sun?" Du Shirao shook his head and glanced at the woman's plump breasts unscrupulously. He said with an intoxicated expression, "Hey, I haven't seen you for a few days, but your breasts seem to be much bigger than before. It seems that you have harmed many pretty boys again. I asked you to do it, but you don't dare to do it. You only dare to look. Are you a man?" Black Widow said disdainfully. "Do you think I don't dare to do it?" Du Shirao's face darkened. "Are you done fooling around?" The old man with a sad face opened his mouth. His voice was stiff and dry, but it was indisputable. "If the target this time is so easy to deal with, the three of us wouldn't have to go together." The two of them were shocked at the same time. The old man never talked nonsense. Since he said so, it must mean that the mission this time should be very difficult. "Let's go." The old man's figure flashed. Like an old bat, he glided in the air, stepped on the wall of the courtyard silently, and disappeared suddenly. His qigong was very experienced. It was obvious that he had practiced it for many years. Black Widow waved her hand, and a soft whip broke through the air and wrapped around the corner of the eaves. She suddenly bounced up and flew into the courtyard. Du Shirao seemed to be sloppy, but once he moved, he was extremely vigilant. His hands climbed up the wall quietly like a gecko. It seemed slow, but his figure disappeared in the blink of an eye. The courtyard was dark, and the cold wind was whistling. The old locust tree in the courtyard rustled and swayed. The atmosphere was so quiet that it was terrifying. Since some time, even the sounds of wild cats and dogs had disappeared. It was as if they had smelled the hidden danger in the night and fled with their tails between their legs. The three of them entered the courtyard and moved forward in a triangular formation. The three of them had rich combat experience and had experienced all kinds of assassinations. However, as soon as they walked into the dark courtyard, they could not help but feel a trace of fear in their hearts. It was as if someone was watching them in the darkness. Something is wrong. My soul perception can detect within a radius of 15 feet. I can confirm that the target is not in the room. Black Widow suddenly said in a low voice. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito, but it was clearly heard by the two people next to her. In other words, I haven't locked on to the target's position. Her face became solemn. Assassinations were meant to kill the target by surprise. However, she could not even lock on to the target's position. The situation was a little serious. Is there something wrong with the information? Du Shirao's eyes were filled with a blade-like cold light. No, the source of the information is reliable. The target has been staying here for the past 10 days and has not left. The old man's face was gloomy, and there was a trace of doubt in his eyes. In my opinion, the target seems to have found us and avoided our detection in advance. Huh? Du Shirao's heart trembled. At the same time, Black Widow suddenly stopped without any warning. Swoosh! In the cold wind, there was a sudden air-piercing sound. Watch out! The old man's face suddenly changed. He exerted all the strength in his body and stretched out his hand. A bronze shield appeared in front of him. The other two reacted quickly as well. They drew their weapons in unison to defend themselves. Bang! The thunder-like impact sounded so loud that it almost burst the eardrums. The bronze shield in the old man's hand suddenly burst into pieces like a piece of paper, and the old man was violently thrown backward. At this moment, the old man's cruelty was fully demonstrated. He suddenly jumped up and glided to one side like a frightened bat. Black Widow and Du Shirao also realized that something was wrong. One of them threw out a long whip and wrapped it around the branch of the old locust tree next to her. She suddenly flew backward like a shooting rainbow. The other directly rolled on the ground and rushed out close to the ground. Bang! A white bone spear fiercely pierced into the place where the three of them had been, blasting a big hole in the ground. The three of them were instantly shocked. How could a young man on the 5th level of martial realm exert such power? A trap. They fell into a trap. The same thought occurred to the three of them. The power of one strike made them all horrified. Such strength was too chilling. Retreat. The three of them had cooperated for many years and had a tacit understanding with each other. They resolutely gave up the action and rushed out. The dark courtyard and the bitter cold wind had become ghastly and horrible in their eyes. The biting chill spread uncontrollably in their hearts. Endless killing intent was hidden in the darkness. It was a trap that had been set for a long time. Bang! Suddenly, a shrill cry sounded out. The old man in the darkness seemed as if he'd been blasted by a cannonball, and he was blasted flying. After that, he crashed through the wall and became completely motionless. Run! Du Shirao was so scared that his soul almost left his body. But at this moment, a cyan blade suddenly appeared, which was so dazzling in the darkness. It is indeed an ambush. The target is not only one person. Du Shirao roared, and a slender awl appeared in his hand. He fiercely hacked at the old man. Bang! 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 In the darkness, there was a sound of collision, and sparks flew in the courtyard. Du Shirao was trapped. Without looking back, Black Widow knew that Du Shirao was in danger. She had no time to care about that. The old man was dead, and Du Shirao was dying. She had to escape now. As long as she could escape from this gloomy and horrible courtyard, Black Widow believed that she could definitely fight her way out. Whoosh! Her figure swayed in the air and flew out. She was a little relieved. This action was definitely the most dangerous one in years. Until now, they had not even seen the shadow of their opponents. Such a trap made her feel terrified. Your companions are all staying here. How can you just leave like this? Suddenly, a quiet voice sounded, which sounded ethereal and ethereal in the dark night. Black Widow's heart sank to the bottom. P.S. Thank you, Brother Black Eye and Cold Heart, for your gift. At 12 o'clock, brothers and sisters, today is the last day of the month and the 10th watch begins. I only ask for monthly votes. Please fight with me to the end. Chapter 79. A delicate and young figure walked out of the darkness. It was obviously a little girl. Her white chin was glistening in the dim starlight. Was her opponent such a little girl? Black Widow couldn't believe it. Whoosh! Suddenly, Black Widow felt a sharp pain on the back of her neck, as if being clamped by an iron clamp. She lost all her strength and was lifted up. From the beginning to the end, she had no time to react at all. Black Widow's heart was filled with great horror. She had the cultivation of the 7th level of martial realm and was a famous professional killer in Donglin Town. She was experienced in fighting, but it was the first time that she had been defeated so easily, and the opponent was just a little girl. How could it be? Black Widow was in a trance. Soon, Xie Ji returned home with Black Widow. She threw Black Widow on the ground and looked at the center of the courtyard. There, Lin Sun was fighting fiercely with Du Shirao. The air was buzzing and the dust was flying. Lin Sun swung his sky breacher. The brilliant cyan saber light was fierce, swift, and clean, displaying the 6-word saber play to the extreme. But his opponent, Du Shirao, was not ordinary. On the contrary, Du Shirao's fighting capacity was more fierce and fearless than Lin Sun's. Du Shirao held a slender awl in his hand. His moves were light and tricky, so Lin Sun had to choose to dodge and defend sometimes. Xie Ji stood on one side of the courtyard and watched quietly, without any intention to help. Beside her, the Black Widow had also completely given up on the thought of escaping. Her expression kept changing as she watched the battle in the field. Who do you think will win? Hearing the voice, the Black Widow was startled. She glanced at Xie Ji. She couldn't see her face clearly, but she felt that the little girl beside her was like a mountain, suffocating her. She didn't dare to move at all. Taking a deep breath, Black Widow gritted her teeth and said, Du Shirao is on the 7th level of martial realm, and his fighting skill, Rolling Cloud Sting, has reached the level of precision in martial Tao. But that boy is only on the 5th level of martial realm. Although his saber play is exquisite, he obviously lacks fighting experience. If there is no accident, Black Widow didn't dare to say anything more. In her opinion, even if Du Shirao won this battle, it would be difficult for him to escape death because this mysterious and powerful little girl was still by his side. Black Widow couldn't help but feel a sense of despair when she thought of this. Not to mention Du Shao. I'm afraid I won't be able to survive this time as well. She glanced around and saw a corpse lying in the corner of the courtyard, in front of a collapsed wall. It was her other companion, Old Frown. This made Black Widow's heart churn again. With the cultivation of the 8th level of martial realm, Frowning Elder's fighting capacity was extremely strong, far beyond that of ordinary people. Years ago, he had successfully assassinated a practitioner on the 9th level of Martial Realm, which made Frowning Elder famous and a senior killer in Donglan Town. Yet now, Old Frown, who was capable of causing countless people to be unable to eat or sleep, had transformed into a corpse. How could this little girl's combat prowess be so terrifying? Black Widow felt an irrepressible sense of loss. There will be no accident. Your companion is bound to lose this battle. Xia Ji stared at the battlefield and said calmly, "Don't you see that Lin Sun has gradually adapted to the battle? He is about to make a breakthrough." Breakthrough? Black Widow's heart shook fiercely. Looking at the battlefield, she found that the lad seemed to be suppressed, but as the battle went on, his sabersmanship became more and more condensed, and his temperament became more and more serious. In particular, his chi was like smoke rising to the sky, boiling like a torrent. Every time he exerted his strength, there was a rumbling sound of thunder. Wisps of white mist pervaded his body, which was a sign that his blood and chi were about to be burned, and it was also a sign that he was about to reach the level of blood burning, the 6th level of Martial Realm. He is going to make a breakthrough in the battle. This is a level that can only be achieved when his cultivation foundation is extremely solid. Black Widow was shocked. She had only noticed the dreadfulness of Xia Ji and didn't pay much attention to Lin Sun. But now seeing such a scene, she suddenly realized that she had underestimated this lad. With the cultivation of the 5th level of the Martial Realm, it was incredible that he could hold on until now under Du Shirao's attack. At least if he were an ordinary cultivator at the 5th level of the Martial Realm, he would have been easily killed by Du Shirao. But now, judging from the fighting chi he showed, it seemed that he was going to make a breakthrough in the battle. Those who could achieve this step could almost be called peerless geniuses. As far as Black Widow knew, Wu Lingsong, who ranked 2nd in the Empire's Nation test 3 years ago, had made a breakthrough in the battle and reached the Gang Spirit Realm. Even the Emperor of the Empire praised Wu Lingsong as the one who ranked 1st in the world's martial arts luck. The 1st place in the nation test was Shai Yutong, the young Sword King, and the 3rd place was Song Xinglia. Both of them were well-known talents in the world, but only Wu Lingsong could win such praise from the Emperor. Although the young man in front of him was only at the 5th level of Martial Realm and was far from being a match for Wu Lingsong, the fact that he could show signs of leveling up in the battle was already shocking enough. Black Widow was overwhelmed with emotions. A lad and a little girl, one more horrible than the other. Compared with them, even she couldn't help but feel frustrated. They were really incomparable. Your companion is going to lose. Xia Ji's sudden words awakened Black Widow. When she looked at the battlefield, she found that although Du Shirao's attacks were still extremely fierce, he was gradually unable to suppress Lin Sun. Du Shirao kept roaring. His long and narrow face was full of shock and anger. It seemed that he also couldn't believe that his opponent was so tenacious. Boom! With a long roar, Du Shirao suddenly thrust the awl in his palm, ready to fight desperately. At the same time, Lin Sun's skin suddenly glowed with a dazzling red color, as if there was a furnace suddenly erupting in his body. In an instant, the aura in his entire body suddenly rose explosively. It was like he'd been reborn, and he'd been reborn to become a completely different person. He made a breakthrough. The Black Widow's heart skipped a beat, and she was in a daze. Such a rare thing had actually been done by this young man. Impossible. Du Shirao also seemed to be frightened by this sudden scene. His ferocious face was full of endless unwillingness. Bang! At the same time, the saber light in Lin Sun's hand fiercely chopped away the awl in Du Shirao's hand. The terrible power made Du Shirao's wrist crack. He screamed and flew out fiercely. Puff! Lin Sun jumped forward and cut off Du Shirao's throat with a clean cut. A touch of scarlet hot blood suddenly burst out and sprinkled in the night, which was sad and beautiful. Lin Sun gasped for breath. He looked at Xia Ji and directly sat cross-legged on the ground, meditating with all his strength. The battle just now lasted for a long time, and was full of unpredictable dangers. It was completely a battle between life and death. Even Lin Sun had to admit that Du Shirao was absolutely the strongest opponent he had met so far. Not only was Du Shirao's cultivation 2 levels higher than Lin Sun's, but Du Shirao's fighting experience was also extremely shrewd, far beyond that of ordinary practitioners. In the end of the battle, Lin Sun's spiritual energy was almost exhausted, which was extremely dangerous. Fortunately, at the last moment, he finally seized the opportunity to break through at the critical moment and turn the situation around. But now, although Lin Sun killed Du Shirao, he made a breakthrough in the battle, which made the blood in his body burn like a boiling furnace. The soaring spiritual energy was more like a runaway wild horse, rampaging in his body. If he didn't control it as soon as possible, he would be in danger of being possessed by the devil. In the night, Lin Sun looked serious and calm. He had devoted himself to cultivation. Black Widow didn't care about this. She stared at Du Shirao's body dully, and her beautiful face looked dejected and helpless in the night. After Old Frown, even Du Shirao was dead. If she had known this earlier, she wouldn't have made this assassination deal. The Black Widow thought bitterly. Next, it should be your turn, right? If you tell me who sent you here, I will let you go immediately. Xia Ji said softly, her voice still tranquil and ethereal. But when Black Widow heard it, she felt a chill all over her body, knowing that death was not far away. I'm just an assassin who helps my employer assassinate the target. We can't know the identity of my employer. Just kill me if you want. Black Widow looked pale and her voice was depressed. She really didn't know. Even if Lin Sun didn't believe her, she had nothing to say. From a moment she became an assassin, she had been ready to accept death if she failed the task. This was a test that every qualified assassin had to face. Xia Ji said after a moment of silence, "You could go now." For a moment, Black Widow almost doubted that she had heard it wrong. After a long time, she cried out involuntarily, "You want to let me go? It's meaningless to kill you," Xia Ji said indifferently. Black Widow thought that Lin Sun was soft-hearted, but when she heard this reason, she found bitterly that Lin Sun didn't take her seriously at all. What did it mean by meaningless? It meant that even if she died, she was worthless to others. "Thank you." Black Widow kept silent for a long time, stood up and bowed to Xia Ji. Then she pointed at the bodies of Du Shirao and Old Frown in the distance and said, "They are both dead. Can I take their bodies away and bury them?" Xia Ji glanced at her with a little surprise and nodded. "That would be great." The Black Widow bowed deeply again and quickly disappeared into the boundless night with the 2 corpses. Clan of Wu or Lin Fei? Xia Ji quietly guarded Lin Sun, standing in the deep night without saying a word. Her dark pupils were full of indifference and coldness. In the past 10 days, she and Lin Sun were also waiting for the news and a chance to kill Lin Fei. Unfortunately, according to the information brought back by the spies sent by Fatty Jiao, Lin Fei had been hiding in Donglin School and never went out. But she didn't expect that before she and Lin Sun took action, the other side couldn't help sending out killers. Whoever he is, he must pay the price of death. The little girl raised her head. A few strands of black hair peeking out from under the brim of the hat were flying in the cold wind. A hint of killing intent flashed across her quiet and beautiful white face in the darkness. Chapter 80. Donglin School. In the early morning, the sun was shining brightly in the school, and the plants were luxuriant. Students in navy blue uniforms rushed to the canteen in groups of 2 or 3. When Lin Fei walked out of the dormitory, his eyes were bloodshot and his eyebrows were tightly knitted. He stayed up all night, waiting for a message. But until now, he still didn't receive any news. Did an accident happen last night? This doubt hit his mind from time to time like a tide, torturing Lin Fei for a whole night. "Lin Fei, how's the preparation?" A charming young girl walked over from afar. She was wearing a fitted school uniform, and she seemed to be in high spirits as she walked. Preparation for what? Lin Fei was stunned. The girl was Yao Su Su, his classmate, who had always admired him. "Do you forget that the county test is in 10 days? Yao Susu rebuked. Oh, Lien Fei patted his forehead and said with a smile, do I need to prepare for it? It's just a test of age and cultivation. I'm sure I can pass it smoothly. Yao Susu walked side by side with Lien Fei and said, don't be careless. You're 15 years old this year, which is not an advantage in terms of age. I heard that there are 3,000 people in our Donglin school who want to take part in the county test, but only 1,000 are admitted. If we add other applicants in Donglin Town, the elimination rate will be even higher. Lien Fei said absent-mindedly, my age is indeed a disadvantage, but I have reached the 5th level of martial realm, which is undoubtedly an advantage over others. I think I won't be eliminated in the county test. Yao Susu giggled. She liked Lien Fei's confident look. As they talked, they had arrived at the canteen. The large canteen was already full of students. The breakfast was rich, consisting of special 8 treasures spiritual porridge and several kinds of green spiritual vegetables, which tasted good. The students of Donglin School were very young. The youngest was only 5 or 6 years old, and the oldest was only 15 years old. Donglin School was an official school, not a local force. It was set up to select talents for the county test of the empire. Students over 15 years old could not participate in the county test and naturally would not be enrolled by Donglin School. At this time, many students in the canteen were talking while eating, which was very lively. The topics of discussion were almost all related to the county test that would begin in 10 days. Lien Fei was not interested in these, and he lowered his head to eat silently. Yao Susu found something wrong with Lien Fei. She couldn't help saying, you seem to have something on your mind. Lien Fei nodded and then explained patiently, don't worry, it's just a small matter. Yao Su's background was not simple. It was said that her family had a great influence in Green Maple County. Green Maple County governed 12 prefectures, and Donglin Town was one of them. In other words, Donglin Town was also under the jurisdiction of Green Maple County. Lien Fei was going to participate in the state examinations in Green Maple County in the future. Moreover, Yao Susu was very fond of him. Under such circumstances, he naturally did not dare to slight her. Yao Susu said with concern, Lien Fei, if you have any trouble, you can tell me. Although my family is not in Donglin Town, I still have a lot of connections. Lien Fei smiled and said, don't worry. Don't tell me you don't believe in the man you like. Yao Susu's face turned red, and she said softly, glib tongue. With this interruption, Yao Susu forgot to continue asking. After the meal, when they walked out of the cafeteria, a middle-aged man came in a hurry with a hint of anxiety on his face. When he saw Lien Fei, he was about to say something, but was stopped by Lien Fei's eyes. Then Lien Fei said to Yao Susu with a smile, a friend is looking for me. Would you like to wait for me in the school? Yao Susu nodded, then turned around and left. Watching the girl's back disappear, Lien Fei's smile suddenly disappeared. He said to the middle-aged man, why did you come so late? As he said, he had led the middle-aged man to a remote corner. The middle-aged man was called Shui Yong, an informant sent by the clan of Wu to contact Lien Fei. I just got the news. Shui Yong sighed. This morning, Black Widow returned the double deposit and admitted that the task was a failure. His words made Lien Fei stiff all over, and his face kept changing. The worst result had come. How could it be possible? Lien Fei tried hard to restrain his anxiety. That guy's just at the 5th level of martial realm. We spent a lot of money to invite Black Widow, Du Shirao, and Old Frown. Not to mention dealing with that guy. It's enough for us to kill an expert at the 9th level of martial realm. How could we fail? Shui Yong said with a gloomy face. It's absolutely true. I heard that. Du Shirao and Old Frown have completely failed and will never appear again. Lien Fei gasped and felt cold all over. After a long time, he suddenly had an idea and said, is there a master helping that boy? Shui Yong said, although Black Widow didn't say it directly, I guess so. Lien Fei asked anxiously, could it be Keystone Business? What he was most worried about was Keystone Business, which was one of the top forces in the empire. Even in Donglin Town, no one dared to provoke it. As far as he knew, Keystone Business had even fallen out with the clan of Wu in order to protect Lin's son, which made the clan of Wu dare not act rashly. If not, Lin Fei would not have been pushed out by the clan of Wu to take the lead to deal with Lin's son. Lin Fei knew that the clan of Wu was making use of him, but he had to accept it in order to avenge his father's death. Besides, he really needed the help of the clan of Wu. Otherwise, he, a student of Donglin School, could not shake the mountain of Keystone Business alone. Hearing the words Keystone Business, Shui Yong narrowed his eyes and said, "It's not certain yet. It's up to you to make a decision." Lin Fei was stunned and then sneered in his heart. He knew that this was the clan of Wu's way of shirking responsibility. If Keystone Business really blamed him, he could only bear the consequences. This was the agreement reached between Lin Fei and the clan of Wu. However, Lin Fei wasn't willing to be used like this. He took a few deep breaths, gritted his teeth, and said, "Since it has already happened, the other party must have been alerted. If it's according to my decision, we should immediately send more forces to end this once and for all." Hearing this, the gloomy look on Shui Yong's face suddenly disappeared, and he laughed. "I heard that shopkeeper Wu Deong of the clan of Wu also thinks so. Great minds think alike." Lin Fei sneered again in his heart. Great minds think alike? Obviously, they have already figured out a countermeasure, but they need me to show up, Lin Fei said bluntly. In this case, what else did shopkeeper Wu Deong say? Shui Yong said, "Assassins can no longer be hired. Now with the death of Du Shirao and Old Scowling, it has caused a lot of waves. I'm afraid that the assassins in the underworld will not dare to get involved again." After a pause, he changed the topic and said, "However, we can hire some ruthless gangsters instead of assassins." Lin Fei asked thoughtfully, "What do you mean?" Shui Yong smiled meaningfully. Lin Sun now lives in the civilian area, where there are many underground gangs. Coincidentally, he is the leader of the largest gang, Tiger Liu. It is said that he is a ruthless man who cares about money more than his life. What's more, Tiger Liu seems to be very old, but he is a veritable practitioner in the early stage of gang spirit realm. Lin Fei was shocked. Ask a practitioner in the gang spirit realm to take action? I'm afraid it will cost a lot, right? Is it worth it? Shui Yong showed a fierce look. Du Shirao, Old Scowling, and Black Widow can't do anything to Lin Sun even if they take action together, so we can only ask Tiger Liu to take action. We must cut the Gordian knot with a knife. The longer we delay, the more disadvantageous it will be for us. Speaking of this, he suddenly realized something and said with a smile, "Of course, it depends on whether you agree or not, child." Lin Fei dared not to agree. He said coldly, "That's the best. Let's see whether Tiger Liu is a real tiger." Shui Yong didn't delay and left with a smile. Looking at his back disappearing, Lin Fei couldn't help showing a strong sneer. What bullshit clan of Wu? Afraid of the power of Keystone Business, you can only use me as a knife. When I become successful in the future, your clan of Wu will be the first one to be attacked. When Lin Fei returned to the school, Yao Susu had already reserved a place for him. Looking at Yao Susu's pretty face, Lin Fei couldn't help showing a bright smile. Whether he could become successful in the future depended on whether he could control Yao Susu, Commoner District, Courtyard 49. Sitting under the old locust tree with a cup of hot tea in his arms, Lin Sun said in surprise, "Did you let that Black Widow go?" Xia Ji sat quietly on the opposite side, reading a book called Records of the Empire's Past Years. The warm winter sunshine sprinkled on her quiet and beautiful little face, full of holy aura. "Well, they're just assassins who work for money. It doesn't make much sense to kill them," Xia Ji said casually. Indeed, it didn't make much sense. Lin Sun thought for a while and appreciated Xia Ji's way of doing things. She knew what she should do and what she shouldn't. The county test will be held in 10 days. Xia Ji suddenly raised her head and glanced at Lin Sun. "Yes." Lin Sun smiled. "I'm less than 14 years old this year. Last night, I broke through to the 6th level of martial realm. I think it should be no problem for me to pass the county test." Speaking of this, he suddenly said, "By the way, do you want to take part in it?" Xia Ji shook her head. I'm not interested. Lin Sun didn't insist anymore. Xia Ji had always been very independent. Although she would follow his ideas on everything, Lin Sun didn't intend to go against her heart. What are you going to do about the clan of Wu? What happened last night should be done by them. Xia Ji asked. Lian Fei has never left Donglin School. He is very smart. I'm afraid it's impossible to kill him first. Lin Sun was also a little surprised. He was the enemy who killed Lian Fei's father, but this guy could bear it and hide in Donglin School obediently. His patience and intelligence were not simple. While they were talking, someone came to visit. Lin Sun opened the door and saw a glamorous woman in a short black leather skirt with a hot figure in front of him. Black Widow. Lin Sun narrowed his eyes. What was she doing here?